Chapter 120. The long spear left his hand, and Zadeh immediately wanted to snatch it back. However, he discovered that tens of sword cheese were aimed at his body's flaws, dashing towards him. If Zadeh were to ignore it, even if he were to use his reduced force field to grab the long spear, he would definitely be pierced through by the sword cheese, because the sword chi was simply too fast and too close. Left with no other choice, he could only unleash his reduced force field to block the sword cheese. With a bang, without the long spear, the reduced force field was activated, shattering the sword cheese that were condensed in the air. However, just as he was about to grab back his long spear, with a loud bang, the reduced force field grabbed onto nothing but air. It turned out that while he was blocking the sword cheese, the other sword cheese had directly struck the long spear which was flying in midair, causing the long spear to fly even further away from Zadeh. It could only be said that Fang Xingjian's attacks were simply too fast. After Zadeh suffered a setback in a single move, he was suppressed by Fang Xingjian's continuous attacks until he was at a disadvantage. Unable to get his hands on the long spear, Zadeh decided not to retreat, but to advance instead. His entire person seemed to have transformed into a long spear, dashing towards Fang Xingjian, who was surrounded by waves of sword cheese. With a furious bellow, Zadeh released his reduced force field without any reservations, shattering all the sword cheese in front of him. If Fang Xingjian were to perform his reduced force field and engage in close combat within the circle, relying on his 92 points of strength which far surpassed Fang Xingjian's, he would have been able to gain an advantage. However, if Zadeh were to rely on his attributes to suppress Fang Xingjian and not care about the profoundness of his moves, he would feel that he had an unfair advantage even if he won. It would be easier for him to be mocked by others. However, now that his long spear had been knocked down, it was no longer the time to be gentlemanly. Zadeh had completely relied on his reduced force field and his strength attribute to crush Fang Xingjian head-on. In an instant, all the sword cheese were destroyed by him through the air. Following that, he punched out again, and his reduced force field encompassed Fang Xingjian's body, holding him back. Following that, Zadeh's hand abruptly pierced out like a steel-long spear, piercing through the air and piercing towards Fang Xingjian's body. Zadeh's series of attacks were completely based on his own strength, using force to suppress others. He didn't care about the intricacies of his moves at all. This was also the countermeasure that most of the knights used when facing enemies who were weaker than them in real battles. They would only talk about techniques when facing enemies with similar attributes. However, just as Zadeh's lips curled up into a smile and his pistol pierced fiercely into Fang Xingjian's body, his smile suddenly froze. Under the violent momentum, he had no choice but to take another 3 steps before he could stop. He was already standing outside the circle. An afterimage? His speed is actually this fast? Zadeh turned back and saw Fang Xingjian standing quietly in the circle, but he didn't give chase. If it was a real battle, he wouldn't have lost. However, according to the agreement just now, stepping out of the circle was already a loss. Shaking his head, Zadeh coldly said, "Fang Xingjian, your sword arts are profound. If I don't use my strength to bully you, it's true that it would be hard for me to win against you. However, don't be too complacent. If we were to engage in a real fight, as long as I can get within 10 meters of you, I'll use my reduced force field and killing techniques to suppress you from the start. I'll be able to kill you within 10 moves." However, Fang Xingjian didn't say a word. He only looked at the long sword in his hand quietly, as if he had silently agreed to Zadeh's words. Lilia, who was at the side, said unhappily, "Old man, you've been cultivating for so many years, and yet you're bullying my teacher who has only transitioned for less than 2 months. Don't you have any shame? Just tell me, do you admit defeat or not?" According to the agreement, I've naturally lost since I stepped out of the circle. However, if we're talking about a real battle of martial arts, I'm naturally not convinced. Zadeh pointed at Fang Xingjian and said, "Fang Xingjian, what do you say? Why don't we have another match?" If they were to have another match, Zadeh decided not to hold back anymore. He would use brute force to suppress Fang Xingjian, relying on his high-strength attribute reduce force field, and killing techniques to defeat his opponent in an instant, not giving him any chance to display his advantage in speed and sword arts. Lilia said angrily, "F***, old man. Don't you have any shame?" Ferdinand also frowned and was about to say something. However, when Fang Xingjian heard this, he shook his head, revealing a disinterested expression. He turned and walked to the back, saying, "You're not my match." Hearing Fang Xingjian's words, Zada was enraged. He took a step forward, wanting to chase after him. "Fang Xingjian, you don't dare to have another match with me?" However, before he could finish his words, just as he took this step forward, his body suddenly let out crisp, cracking sounds. The upper half of his night attire was instantly shattered, turning into tens of pieces that fell onto the ground. Zada, who was only left with his pants, was stunned. Following that, he felt a lingering fear, as if he had been doused with cold water. He used sword light to slash apart the night attire. In a lightning-fast battle, facing Zada's spear attacks that were like the mountains and seas, using a 3-foot sword light to slash apart the other party's night attire, yet not harming the other party's skin. How fast must one's speed be for one to be able to detect it? How stable and precise must one sword technique be to be able to tear apart the other party's clothes without being injured? How high must one's martial arts realm be for one to be able to see through the flaws in Zada's spear arts? If he wanted to kill me, he would have already killed me 7 or 8 times earlier. A thought appeared in Zada's mind, causing him to break out in cold sweat. Without saying another word, Zada clasped his hands and left silently. At this moment, he had completely extinguished all thoughts of competing with Fang Xingjian. Fang Xingjian's sword arts talent and martial arts realm were far beyond what he could compare with. When the people in the surroundings saw this scene, they all drew in a cold breath. He can even win like this? Ferdinand's eyes opened wide as he suddenly thought, if even Zada's spear arts can't stop him, then wouldn't my spear arts be like tofu in his eyes, easily pierced through? At this moment, he was extremely glad that he had become friends with Fang Xingjian. Lilia dashed forward, grabbing onto Fang Xingjian's arm and shaking it, her face flushed with excitement. "Teacher, how did you do it earlier? Can you teach me?" Everyone else looked at Fang Xingjian with gazes filled with admiration. This time around, they were completely convinced by Fang Xingjian, and in their hearts, they treated Fang Xingjian as the authority in terms of martial arts. Jack and Anthony even started to suspect if there was anyone else who could defeat Fang Xingjian at the first transition night stage. Anthony shook his head. "I don't know. But at least in our academy, other than Lord Jackson and Master Huang Lin, there's probably no one else who can defeat the god of battle, Fang Xingjian." The news of Zada's defeat spread out very quickly. Therefore, other than a few prefectural champions who had been defeated by Fang Xingjian and their classes, even more knight students came to the reflection room, requesting for Fang Xingjian's guidance. This also allowed Fang Xingjian's speed of collecting sword techniques to increase, and he was also getting closer to leveling up his unparalleled sword intent. The first level of the unparalleled sword intent had already made him almost invincible in terms of close combat martial arts. He was very curious about the effects of the leveled up unparalleled sword intent. And on the third day, Zada also got someone to send over the Empire's divine weapon he had lost. It was a silvery white dagger that had been repeatedly forged using steel that had been tempered 100 times. This dagger was extremely sharp, and it would be a piece of cake for it to slice through gold and jade. This was also the first Empire's divine weapon that Fang Xingjian had obtained, and the first weapon that had a grade. Holding onto this Empire's divine weapon, a stats window suddenly popped up before Fang Xingjian's eyes. It was the introduction of this Empire's divine weapon. Silver Dragon, level 7, abnormally sharp, able to slice through any weapon or armor whose grade was lower than his. This dagger had obviously been prepared by Zada for himself. In actual combat, the moment his opponent managed to sneak up on him and his long spear was no longer useful, he would be able to pull out this dagger and launch a sneak attack. Starting from the Empire's divine weapons, To the inferior remains divine weapons, superior remains divine weapons, and divine remains equipment. All of them had their own grades. Empire's divine weapons from level 1 to 9. Inferior remains divine weapons from level 10 to 19. Superior remains divine weapons from level 20 to 29. And divine remains equipment from level 30. All of them had different prowess. It was unlike ordinary weapons that were forged, where one could not see the stats window and grade, even when holding them in their hands. Fang Xingjian tested the sharpness of this dagger. All the other metal swords were like thick cardboard in front of him, breaking into pieces. However, daggers were different from swords. If Fang Xingjian wanted to use the silver dragon, he would have to hold a sword in one hand and a dagger in the other. Only then would he be able to activate the supreme Mistwind sword and the single sword world subjugation. Usually, he would just keep the silver dragon by his waist so that he could use it whenever he needed to. Many days passed by, and the number of nurturing techniques that Fang Xingjian had collected reached an unprecedented 79 sets. He had also picked up Zhou Yang's killing technique, the radiant light sword technique. It was a pity that the time was still too short, and he had not been able to cultivate all of his nurturing techniques to the maximum level. But even so, he had still improved by leaps and bounds during this period of time. The level of his sword arts had risen greatly, and he could now use all sorts of sword techniques with great ease. All martial techniques were filled with flaws before him, unable to withstand a single blow. Chapter 121. Therefore, Fang Xingjian's abilities increased once again, and his attributes became: name Fang Xingjian, age 16, occupation Wind Shadow, sword, divinity level 10, strength 56 plus 5 agility 89 plus 5 reaction, 55 endurance, 49 flexibility, 51. The attributes above come into effect once the Sonido sword Zephyr Waves is activated. Due to perfect muscles, plus 5 in strength and agility, 10% of the endurance attribute. Nurturing sword techniques, 79 sets. Training sword techniques, 12 sets. Supreme Mistwind sword, level 25. Radiant light sword technique, level 6. Specialties: genius swordsmanship, elementary survival instinct, internal healing, internal training, sword specialist, high agility, motion vision, high reflexes, perfect muscles, elementary berserkness, supreme sword intent, 75 out of 100, potential 11,000 points increase / day waves level. 5 Sonido sword Zephyr Waves mental cultivation method, level 3. Ice Age meditation art. Right now, if he wanted to become stronger, there were 3 directions he could take. One was to temper his attributes and raise the level of his waves, which meant that his foundation would become increasingly sturdy. The second was to learn sword techniques and raise the level of his unparalleled sword intent. The third was that after the Supreme Mistwind sword reached the maximum level, the lethality and maximum speed of his sword cheese would increase once again. Therefore, after another 5 days, Fang Xingjian decided to put in a lot of effort to cultivate the Supreme Mistwind sword, finally bringing this powerful killing technique to the maximum level of level 30. At level 30, other than the 3 feet sword light and sword cheese, the Supreme Mistwind sword also had an additional special effect, controlling the strong currents in the atmosphere down to the finest detail, allowing one to condense sword cheese until they reach a distance of 100 meters before dissipating. Originally, Fang Xingjian's sword cheese could only reach a distance of over 10 meters, at most over 20 meters. Now, with the additional special effect of condensing sword cheese, he could directly attack a target 100 meters away with his sword cheese, greatly increasing the threat. It was as if he had an additional function like a shock wave, turning a handgun into a cannon. However, now that his Supreme Mistwind sword had reached the maximum level, it meant that his killing techniques could no longer be improved. Right now, he could only rely on tempering his attributes, waves, and mental cultivation method to raise his abilities. Next, he had to cultivate more sword techniques and strive to raise his sword intent. On this day, more than 30 knights were practicing their swordsmanship together outside the confinement room. From time to time, There would be a flash of white light in the air, hitting their bodies like flying swords. Every knight who was struck by the sword would stop their movements and reveal a pondering and savoring expression. Not long after, they would return to their training, their faces filled with excitement and delight. The ones closest to the bars were Lilia, Jack, and Anthony. Their improvement during this period of time could be said to be terrifying. Under Feng Xingzhan's guidance, it was as if they suddenly had talent comparable to Countess. In just a short span of 20 days, each of them had trained a martial technique they had learned to the maximum level of level 10. This made them even more excited. Almost every day, they were the first to arrive and the last to leave. For people like Lilia, she simply got her subordinates to set up a tent outside the stone house where she was confined. She ate, drank, and slept there all day. From this, one could see her determination. Even though her talent in swordsmanship was mediocre, with the guidance of an expert like Feng Xingzhan, she would have the chance to soar into the skies. Lilia's expression was serious and solemn as she swept out with the long sword in her hand. Each slash and slash caused the air to tremble, releasing thunderous sounds. This was the result of her mastery of the entire set of swordsmanship techniques. All the power in her body had been twisted into one, and then unleashed explosively in an instant. With this, the effects of her cultivation of nurturing sword techniques would be even better. If she were to use this method of channeling force in close combat, it would be even more terrifying. It was a pity that Feng Xingzhan had offended Renault, Xiao Yi, Rhoda, Hamel, and a few other classes. Now that there were more than 30 knights here to learn, it was almost the limit. However, just as everyone was extremely serious in their training, a commotion suddenly came from the outside. Charlie gulped and walked toward Feng Xingzhan, one step at a time. Behind him were two members of the association staff. They were clearly the people who were guarding him. When the surrounding students saw Charlie's appearance, their eyes flashed with all sorts of disdain, hatred, fury, and resentment. This person who had taken Feng Xingzhan away for investigation and caused Feng Xingzhan to be bettered and had become the subject of a scandal in the academy during this period of time. It was just that the students now had a common enemy, and with the help of Feng Xingzhan's guidance during this period of time, they hated and detested Charlie. Of course, when faced with people from the association, they would not dare to do something so extreme. However, they still dared to glare at each other with hatred. Charlie seemed to completely ignore these hostile gazes, smiling as he approached the stone house. However, when he reached the front, he was blocked by Lilia, Jack, and Anthony. Lilia pointed at his nose and scolded, "You still have the cheek to come here? Haven't you caused enough harm to my master?" With that, she raised the big sword in her hand and shouted, "Scram! Don't force me to hit you." Jack and Anthony also looked at Charlie with hostility, showing no signs of giving way. The smile on Charlie's face was a little grim. If it were in the past, as a conferred knight and a level 1 agent of the association, there would be no need for him to consider these people's thoughts. He would just dash over with a sway. However, he could only cup his hands together and say, "I'm sorry, I have a very important matter which I need to meet Feng Xingzhan. Can I trouble you guys to let me pass?" Lilia let out an angry snort and waved her huge sword fiercely. Just as she was about to do something, Feng Xingzhan's voice rang out from the depths of the room. "Lilia, let him in." Lilia looked at Charlie reluctantly and said, "I'll let you off this time around. You better be careful." Charlie smiled bitterly and walked into the depths of the room alone. The two members of the association followed behind him. In the darkness, Feng Xingzhan slowly sat cross-legged in a corner. Streams of white sword light continued to cut through the air, circling around his body. They were streams of extremely condensed sword cheese. Each of them was no different from ordinary steel longswords, and they would be able to pierce through a person's body just by brushing past them. Looking at this scene, Charlie's eyelids twitched slightly. The speed at which Feng Xingzhan was improving was terrifying. However, he knew that this was not the time to be thinking about these. He looked at the two colleagues next to him and said, "Can I trouble the two of you to step back for a while? I have some things to discuss with Xingzhan." The two of them hesitated. Just then, Fang Xingjian said, "It's fine. The two of you can step back for now. Although he's a conferred knight and is stronger than me, if he wants to kill me, he won't be able to do so within a short period of time." The two of them exchanged a glance, nodded, and said, "Then we will stay outside the room. If there's anything, you can call for us at any time." After the two of them left, Charlie used his reduced force field to freeze the air around the windows and door, preventing their voices from spreading out. After making sure that there were no problems, he looked at Fang Xingjian and said, "Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you right now? You won't be able to kill me." Fang Xingjian shook his finger and said calmly, "Therefore, there's no need to waste time on bargaining. I've waited for you for so many days, and you've finally come. Tell me, for the sake of your future, what can you give me?" Chapter 122. Charlie's eyes were fixed on Fang Xingjian's, and no one could tell what he was thinking in his cold eyes. Fang Xingjian did not seem to mind at all. He merely closed his eyes and continued to cultivate his sword arts. Good. Charlie stared at him in detail, and at the next moment, his body became dispirited. He said, as expected of a super genius that only appears once in 100 years. Be it in terms of talent, spirit, or mentality, they all far surpass that of ordinary people. It's no wonder that the first prince thinks so highly of you. It was a pity that he was at the second transition. If he could, he would be able to kill Fang Xingjian within a few minutes at most. However, he had no choice but to compromise. Cut the crap. Take out your chips. Charlie let out a bitter laugh, took out half a book, and threw it to Fang Xingjian. "I've been learning martial arts in the spiritual weapon hall since young. After I became a knight, I learned the killing technique of the spiritual weapon hall, ether divine art. I'm not very interested in killing techniques." Fang Xingjian picked up the book and started reading. It was true that he was not very interested in killing techniques. Charlie nodded and said, "Of course, killing techniques are killing and destructive arts. It's enough for ordinary people to specialize in a few of them for their entire lives. However, the ether divine art from our spiritual weapon hall is different. It's special. This is a killing technique that can be used by any job or expert in the world. It's because it doesn't kill the enemy directly, but provides the cultivator with a weapon to kill." When Charlie was introducing it, Fang Xingjian was also reading the contents of the ether divine art. He was immediately attracted by its exquisite content. Everything in the world is in ether particles. The ether divine art talked about how to restrain the waves from ether particles and stack them up continuously, forming a weapon that was like a light beam. First transition knights could unleash their powers on ether particles, transforming them into light, heat, electricity, magnetism, and radiation, causing great damage. Second transition conferred knights could communicate with ether particles, changing their nature and breaking through the limits of the human body. Ether particles were a special type of wave, and light was also a type of wave. The ether divine art was a killing technique that converted the two. However, this was just a theory. Speaking of the ether divine art, one had to talk about the classification of weapons in the world. First of all, weapons forged from ordinary rare materials by the Empire's masters were mostly called the Empire's divine weapons. Furthermore, weapons forged from the remains of knight level, first transition, experts were known as inferior remains divine weapons. A weapon forged from the remains of a conferred knight, second transition, expert was called a superior remains divine weapon. The strongest weapons, which were forged from the remains of divine level experts, were known as divine remains equipment. However, they had a more detailed classification method. Any armor could be divided into levels 30, just like the human body. They were the Empire's divine weapons from level 1 to 9, the inferior remains divine weapons from level 10 to 19, the superior remains divine weapons from level 20 to 29, and the level 30 divine remains equipment. As for the method of condensing ether light waves through waves to form the ether effulgence weapon, it was usually only after one had gone through the second transition and had gone through the stage of heaven's perception, being able to communicate with ether particles. Only then would one be able to grasp a powerful killing technique. Almost every conferred knight would have their own ether effulgence weapon to increase the prowess of their weapons. The ether effulgence weapon cultivated from the ether divine art provided by Charlie could allow the cultivator to grasp the ether effulgence weapon of a conferred knight at the knight level. It could be said to be the most secretive of the secretive arts. If one were to grasp the techniques of a conferred knight at the knight level, how much of an advantage would they have in a battle at the same stage? How much of an element of surprise would it be? And how much of an advantage would it be, in terms of time, to cultivate the ether effulgence weapon earlier? The cultivation of the ether effulgence weapon started with a level 1 Empire's divine weapon. Thereafter, this weapon could become stronger through continuous cultivation. One could even cultivate all the way from a level 1 Empire's divine weapon to a level 10 inferior remains divine weapon, then to a level 20 superior remains divine weapon, and finally to a level 30 divine remains equipment. It was just that this kind of cultivation was much more difficult and time-consuming than the cultivation of ordinary humans. With a tap of Charlie's finger, a stream of green light slowly extended out from his fingertip. Streams of light continued to stack up, and a longsword that was formed purely from light waves floated above his palm. This longsword was formed purely from the stacking up of countless streams of green light. It was about 1 meter long, and the light at the area beyond 1 meter grew increasingly dimmer. Eventually, at a distance of 10 meters, the light seemed to have dissipated completely. Charlie casually grabbed this green light sword and waved it lightly. Then Fang Xingjian felt a slight dizziness. This ether effulgence weapon of mine is called the Green Fantasy. It is a level 10 inferior remains divine weapon. Although it does not have a physical body and is unable to fend off physical sword attacks, its poison damage can already threaten a level 10 knight. Of course, because ether effulgence weapons of the same level are formed from the stacking up of ether light waves, they do not have a physical body and only have special effects. Therefore, they are unable to be comparable to divine weapons of the same level. However, the ether effulgence weapon has another special characteristic. It can be attached to a physical body. This is a killing technique that can continuously increase the prowess of your weapon as your abilities increase. Moreover, the ether divine art in our Chi weapon hall is a cultivation method that can raise the effulgence weapon all the way to level 30. Not every effulgence weapon cultivation method can allow one to reach level 30. A satisfied smile broke out on Fang Xingjian's face. With a slight movement of his palm, white light spots also started to appear intermittently, as if they were going to form something. However, they were like a recorder with a bad signal, unable to achieve anything even after a long time. Is this the effulgence weapon? Fang Xingjian suddenly thought of the battle between him and Rhoda and the other three. That female knight Rhoda, who was not inferior to any man, had suddenly exploded at the very end. The red light long spear she had performed should also be an effulgence weapon. However, although the method she had used could also be used to perform effulgence weapons at the knight level, it was clearly much cruder than the ether divine art in the Chi weapon hall. It could even cause serious damage to the body. Fang Xingjian lifted his head and asked, "Where is the second half of the ether divine art?" Charlie said calmly, "If you promise to testify for me that I did not harm you during the interrogation, I'll naturally hand the second half of the ether divine art to you." Fang Xingjian nodded and said, "No problem." Charlie asked in astonishment, "You agree?" "Why? You don't agree?" Fang Xingjian smiled coldly and said, "Anyway, even if I testify for you, you won't be able to receive any more attention from the leaders. Even if you aren't sent to the southern borders, you'll still be a marginalized character in the association in the future. My improvement will only get faster and faster, and I'll be able to surpass you very soon. There's no need for me to hold on to you. But are you sure that after I testify, they won't hold on to me anymore? You don't have to worry about this." Charlie nodded and said dejectedly, "But it's not that easy to attain a breakthrough to become a conferred knight. Throughout history, there have been countless knights who have failed at heaven's perception, unable to go through the second transition for the rest of their lives." Hee hee. All right, there'll be people from the association coming to ask you questions later. Just answer them as you see fit. I'll send the second half of the Ether Divine Art to you by tonight at the latest. Remember, after you're done reading it, burn it immediately. Don't let anyone know that you've cultivated the Ether Divine Art. Otherwise, the people from the Spiritual Weapon Hall won't let you off. As long as Feng Xingjian relented, the First Prince's influence would naturally be able to fish Charlie out easily. Of course, Feng Xingjian could understand the importance the faction placed on their legacy manuals. Although he did not know what the consequences would be if Charlie were to impart it to him privately, it was still best to keep it a secret. As for how much Charlie had to pay in other aspects to make up for this mistake, Feng Xingjian was even less concerned. However, it was clear that it had to be a painful price to pay. That night, Feng Xingjian looked at the complete Ether Divine Art and started to study it with great interest. As long as he could master this Ether Divine Art, he would be able to possess the Effulgence weapon, which only conferred knights had at the knight level. This would allow the weapon to have an additional special effect. This would allow him to accumulate more resources for the growth of his abilities. Moreover, this was a legacy manual that could lead one to a level 30 Effulgence weapon. For most sects, the Effulgence weapon's cultivation technique would be a treasure that everyone would fight for once it reached level 20. Of course, the Effulgence weapon only increased the weapon's special effects and increased the knight's destructive prowess. It was a killing technique that pursued destructive and destructive prowess, and it had no effect on the maintenance and strengthening of the human body. Feng Xingjian sat cross-legged, the waves throughout his body circulating incessantly. Streams of distorted light waves were jumping and flashing between his hands, but they did not take form. Due to the uniqueness of the waves in the human body, each person could only have one Ether Divine Effulgence weapon. The special effects cultivated were only related to the person's personality, waves, and mental cultivation method. It was very difficult to accurately predict. Each time a new Effulgence weapon was formed, it would lead to the Effulgence weapon's level being reset to 0. Therefore, the first step in forming an Effulgence weapon was very important to know the style and direction of the Effulgence weapon. Therefore, when each conferred knight created their own Ether Effulgence weapon, they would be very careful and think carefully. Rather than saying that it was a type of weapon, it would be better to say that it was a special effect that could be used at any time and place. It could even be used to attach itself to different weapons. Right now, Feng Xingjian wanted to strengthen his foundation and condense the most outstanding Ether Effulgence weapon, so that he could add a powerful special effect to his divine weapon in the future. In his palm, countless streams of white light slowly formed the shape of a longsword. However, at the next moment, the light shattered and the longsword dissipated. Feng Xingjian shook his head. This one won't do. Then, the space between his palms continued to jump, and new light spots started to flash. On this night, Feng Xingjian's two-handed sword continued to form Ether Effulgence weapons, and Effulgence weapons continued to shatter. It was a pity that this cultivation method was not for sword arts, but for the comprehension of ether particles and waves. This caused Feng Xingjian's cultivation speed to be unprecedentedly slow. Chapter 123. Just as Feng Xingjian was condensing his Effulgence weapon and pursuing greater breakthroughs in his abilities, in the distant snowy plains in the north, a lady dressed in purple clothes and with purple hair was running at high speed. With each step she took, it was as if she was walking on clouds, not leaving any traces on the snowy ground at all. She was able to cover a distance of over 30 meters with ease. Just like that, her feet formed a line, and she brought out a long stream of air currents, advancing at a speed that was 10 times that of supersonic speed. Wherever she passed by, air currents would spread out, pushing away a great amount of snow water or blowing it up into the sky. She even brought up some sparks, leaving behind traces that were like meteors. A large amount of snow water was evaporated, leaving behind a large area of white fog. However, even though she was advancing at such a high speed, her face was still filled with panic. It was as if there was some huge prehistoric beast chasing after her. After running for a distance of over 100 kilometers, the entire sky suddenly turned dark. Countless black light screens descended from the sky, encompassing the area of over 1,000 meters around the purple-haired lady. Seeing this dark sky screen descending from the sky, a hint of despair flashed on the lady's face. "George Creek, must you be so ruthless?" Just then, the black light screen slowly split open, dissipating like seething black chi. A total of 3 people, 2 men and 1 lady, walked out from it. One of the men wore black armor and had a crimson cape draped over his back. He was completely encompassed in black armor. It was clear that he was an Empire's conferred knight. Seething black fog continued to emit from the body of the black-armored knight, connecting together with the surrounding dark sky screen. It was clear that this sky screen, which encompassed a range of 1 kilometer, was his masterpiece. The countless spatial gaps in the surroundings were sealed up by his ability, turning into a maze that one could never get out of. It was a top-notch killing technique used to trap enemies, Hell's Corridor. The other lady was dressed in palace attire. Even though it was a few degrees below zero, she still revealed her snow-white thighs and tender arms, not showing any hint of coldness. In front of the two of them was a golden-armored, golden-robed, middle-aged man who shone with a strong aura of nobility, like a god that had descended from the heavens. The man had a square face and an extremely dignified expression. His every move revealed boundless nobility and superiority. His eyes revealed unparalleled dignity and dominance, as if he wanted to firmly control everything in this world. "Surrender, Li Zi. As long as you sign the Devil's Note, I guarantee that no one in the entire Empire will pursue your matter." "Pursue my matter?" A bone-piercing, killing intent flashed on Li Zi's face as she glared fiercely at the First Prince and said, "Your Krieg clan has gone back on your word. You've destroyed our one-intention-style dojo, wiped out our sacred land, dug up our ancestral graves, and used the corpses of our ancestors to refine weapons and armor. Now, you're even trying to kill me. Ha ha ha. Everyone from your Krieg clan will die a horrible death." Her words were filled with intense resentment, as if she was a female ghost that had been around for many years and was cursing the living in the darkness. The First Prince shook his head, and hints of cruelty and coldness flashed in his eyes. He said calmly, "Your one-intention style has taken over the mountains and taken over the lands, gathered the refugees to create trouble and threaten the authorities. Your intentions are deserving of death. On account of your outstanding talent, I've spared your life and allowed you to serve the Empire to forgive your sins. Why aren't you thanking me?" As he spoke, the First Prince put out his palm and slapped down lightly toward Li Zi. In that instant, the weather changed, and the world seemed to have lost its color. The air let out crisp kacha-kacha sounds, as if it was being shattered inch by inch. The First Prince's palm also seemed to fill up the world in that instant, encompassing the entire sky. In the end, it turned into a world that descended toward Li Zi. In that instant, Li Zi's eyes revealed an expression of endless terror. It was because in her eyes, a world had unknowingly appeared in the First Prince's hand. It was a world filled with mountains of blades and seas of fire, with endless blood and corpses. It was a world filled with despair and hardship. The entire world was filled with people who were being tortured and judged. Some had their waists slashed in half, some were being roasted in oil, some had their limbs broken, and some had their hearts and livers pierced. The world in that palm was like hell. When Li Zi focused on looking over, she realized that all the people who were being tortured looked exactly the same as her, bringing hell to the mortal world, using a world to smash you. Purgatory, demonic tome, overturned hell. The First Prince's world-shaking palm directly brought along the concept of hell descending into the world and the heaviness of the world. Not only did it contain boundless power that shattered the air, but it also brought along a domineering force that could crush a person's spiritual will. What was even more terrifying was that within this move, the surrounding snowy mountains, snowy lands, and people all seemed to have been stretched out or compressed. This was clearly a powerful force compressing space, causing space to be stretched out and bent like noodles. Space was very sturdy, and even all the divine-level experts in the world would not be able to shatter it. However, space was also very tenacious, able to be stretched out and bent. This was one of the hidden concepts of the overturn hell move. It was to distort the mortal world, to control the world with one's own power, to be able to bend and flatten it as one pleased. Faced with this extremely terrifying attack from the first prince, Li Zi also displayed the true abilities of an unrivaled genius. She struggled fiercely, breaking free from the endless hell's illusion. Then, with a tremble of her body, 3 silhouettes darted out from her body. The 3 silhouettes all looked exactly the same as her. It was not just their external appearances. Even their equipment, powers, and auras were exactly the same. There was no difference at all. It was as if Li Zi had suddenly gained 3 times more power. With a loud bellow, the muscles all over their bodies trembled violently, and their waves and mental cultivation method circulated crazily, squeezing out every bit of their potential. At the next moment, each of Li Zi's hands formed seals. Their hands, which were moving in extremely fast speed, were as if different elements had suddenly bloomed amidst the chaos. One of Li Zi's hands seemed to have formed a water flower. Another Li Zi's hands danced rapidly as she formed seals, like a ball of exploding flames. Another Li Zi's hands danced rapidly as she formed seals, bringing along a series of afterimages that were like a strong gust of wind. The last Li Zi, who was also Li Zi herself, clasped her fists together and pressed out toward the palm that was descending from the heavens with extreme serenity and vigor. For types of hand seals, 4 types of powers. They represented the 4 types of powers of creation in the legends: earth, water, fire, and wind. When the first prince used the concept and power of hell's descent, distorting the world to smash down, Li Zi used 4 times the power, which contained the concept of splitting the heavens and splitting the earth and resetting the earth, water, fire, and wind to retaliate. If you want to let hell descend and distort the mortal world, then I'll split the heavens and earth and blast this hell of yours apart. This extremely exquisite move caused the first prince's eyes to shine brightly. He bellowed, "What a great 4 seals of world creation! You've already mastered 70% of the one heart styles, heaven-splitting great palm imprint, and one person's 4 transformations. Since that's the case, I won't hold back anymore." A loud rumble rang out. With the first prince's words, countless cracks appeared in the sky. No, those were not cracks that had opened up in the sky. Instead, it was because the space had been compressed by the violent powers, revealing the gaps between spaces. This was because even the Hell's corridor that the Dark Knight had performed had been broken. Although space was sturdy and could not be broken, the natural gaps between spaces could still be made use of by strong experts. And when the first prince's palm pressed down, not only did it break open the Hell's corridor, but it also caused the gaps in space, which were everywhere, to appear. Even ordinary people could see them. How violent was this power? What a terrifying technique. It was as if Mount Tai had come crashing down, causing the mountains and rivers to collapse. Within a range of 1,000 meters, the entire ground seemed to have been slapped down by a huge palm, and the ground sank several meters deep. After a very long time, the smoke dissipated. The first prince looked at the figure who had fallen down and said calmly, "Black Devil, bring her back." Hearing that, the black-armored knight sent out a hand, and streams of black smoke swept up the unconscious Li Zi, bringing her into the Hell's corridor, which was covered in a black screen of light. A lady dressed in palace attire said, "Congratulations to your highness for taking in another unparalleled talent. The completion of the Hell's map is just around the corner." The first prince shook his head. "It's still too slow. According to the records in the Book of Universal Truth, those evil gods are about to come. Time is still too tight." The lady dressed in palace attire consoled. "First prince, why must you force yourself like this? Descent isn't a matter that concerns just one city or one country. As long as it's under the starry sky, No one will be able to escape. When the time comes, they'll understand. I just can't bear for these great rivers and mountains, as well as the martial world, to be destroyed." Saying that, the first prince's countenance turned solemn, and his domineering aura once again exuded from his body. "Let's go." The holy sea of truth is about to fall into chaos, and the situation is worrying. The three mage kings are getting restless as well. We can't wait any longer. The holy sea of truth was the #1 religion in the world, and it dominated the 3 countries in the north. Its influence was only above that of the empire, which was situated in the southwest. Just as the first prince was speaking, the lady dressed in palace attire frowned. After pressing down on her forehead, she said, "Your Highness, this is a matter regarding the great western region. Charlie has failed, and Fang Xingjian is in the great western region. With the governor backing him up, there's probably no one who can deal with him." Oomph. I also didn't expect that second brother would be able to take David under his wing without saying a word. Humph. To be in charge of a region's knights and have several thousand official knights under him. How impressive. These old fogies are getting more and more outrageous. They're really treating the things that belong to my clan as their own. But it doesn't matter. Now that I've exposed Devitt for the sake of Fang Xingjian, the losses outweigh the gains. At the end of the day, the Windstorm Sword Hero is just a first transition job. I've already made arrangements. Now, the most important thing is still the changes to the Holy Sea of Truth in my Devil's Note. Only when my Devil's Note reaches perfection and attains the unparalleled path of purgatory will all living things in this world have a chance of survival. Chapter 124. Finally, after a month in the confinement chamber, Fang Xingjian returned to his villa. During this period of time, Fang Xingjian had been training hard day and night, continuously tempering his attributes, cultivating his mental cultivation method, waves, and sword techniques. Of course, he still channeled all his potential into his agility, increasing his abilities once again. His attributes had now become: name Fang Xingjian, age 16, occupation Wind Shadow, sword, divinity level 10, strength 56 plus 5 agility, 91 plus 5 reaction, 55 endurance, 49 flexibility, 51. The attributes above come into effect once the Sonido Sword Zephyr Waves is activated. Due to perfect muscles, plus 5 in strength and agility, 10% of the endurance attribute. Nurturing sword techniques, 79 sets. Training sword techniques, 12 sets. Supreme Mistwind Sword level 30. Radiant Light Sword Technique level 6. Ether Divine Art level 1. Genius Swordsmanship, Elementary Survival Instinct, Internal Healing, Internal Training, Sword Specialist, High Agility Motion Vision, Heightened Reflexes, Perfect Muscles, Elementary Berserkness, Unparalleled Sword Intent, 79 out of 100, potential 11,000 points. Increase / Day Waves level 5. Sonido Sword Zephyr Waves Mental Cultivation Method level 3. Ice Age Meditation Art. Right now, Fang Xingjian had reached the maximum level for 79 sword techniques. Right now, his sword arts cultivation was progressing at a tremendous pace, improving tremendously with each passing day. Almost any casual move he made would transform into all sorts of exquisite sword techniques. However, at the same time, he could only find these sword techniques from the students and the library. It's a pity that the killing techniques hidden in the academy, such as Demonic Dusk and Eternal Divine Sword, are not pure sword techniques. Instead, they rely on waves and ether particles to unleash special powers, similar to Ether Divine Art. Fang Xingjian would probably take even longer to level up these sword techniques compared to the Supreme Mistwind Sword. He might not even be able to count them as part of the unparalleled sword intent when he reached the pinnacle. Therefore, Fang Xingjian's plan was to collect other nurturing and training sword techniques. These 2 sword techniques were the safest and fastest for him. Waves and potential can only increase my attributes slowly over time. There's still over 10 days before the academy starts its practical training. When that time comes, I'll put in all my effort to increase my level and abilities. As for my mental cultivation method and unparalleled sword intent, I can still think of a way to improve them. As an expert of the speed attribute, Fang Xingjian's current speed was already very fast with his high attributes and a single sword world subjugation specialty. If he were to meet a strong enemy, he could even perform the supreme mist wind sword and boundaries negation together, taking it a step further and reaching the realm of supersonic speed. This kind of high-speed attack, coupled with the ability to see through things with the unparalleled sword will, made his attack power extremely strong. What he needed now was to continuously strengthen these advantages. Regardless of whether it was tempering his physical attributes, cultivating his waves, or cultivating his sword arts to strengthen his sword intent, all of them were considered as such. His biggest problem now was the problem of weapons. An ordinary iron sword would not be able to support him in a high-speed battle, especially since he had made some progress during this period of time. His speed had become even faster, and the time it took for his iron sword to be worn out was also shorter. Most of the time, when dealing with weaker knights, he might as well just sweep them with his sword chi. However, weapons were not something that he could deal with casually. The only thing he could do was to wait for the governor to complete his divine weapon, and then work hard to cultivate his ether divine art. This chi weapon hall's ultimate technique that Charlie had given him was truly profound and worth studying. Thinking of this, Fang Xingjian opened up his palm, and streams of light flowed out from his arm. Within a short period of time, they formed a white blade of light in the air above his palm. Then, Fang Xingjian flicked his index finger slightly, and a metal sword in the distance flew over like a marionette, landing in his palm. He slowly covered the metal sword with the light blade, and in the blink of an eye, it entered it. The light beam weapon cultivated by the ether divine art did not have a physical body, but was a pure electromagnetic wave weapon. Despite this, it could still use electromagnetic waves to raise and lower the temperature, as well as to perform fire and ice attacks. It could also use radiation to inflict poison damage, electric fields to inflict lightning damage, and many other special effects. Especially after covering the effulgence weapon with a weapon, one would be able to bestow the special effects of attacks onto the physical weapon while possessing a physical body. This was what Fang Xingjian was doing right now. After the light blade entered the metal sword, the entire metal sword trembled and seemed to be covered in a layer of faint fog, becoming blurry. Fang Xingjian did not choose high temperature, low temperature, poison, lightning, or any other messy special effects. It was because he knew what he needed the most. With Earth's technology, the sharpest saber and sword that could be created at the moment, the nature of the high-frequency saber and sword is based on electromagnetic tremors. All materials are uneven, and high-speed tremors can make use of this to accumulate the fatigue of materials, achieving the goal of slicing through any material. And the ability of my effulgence weapon is the word tremor. The reason why the long sword in Fang Xingjian's hand felt blurry was because the blade itself was trembling at a speed of 500 times per second. However, at the next moment, the metal sword shattered and the effulgence weapon dissipated. Fang Xingjian's ether effulgence weapon had failed once again. The prowess of high-speed tremors is extremely great, but it also means that it is unstable. I'll still need time to condense such an ether effulgence weapon. It was obvious that Fang Xingjian wanted to condense an indestructible high-frequency effulgence weapon. However, the process was much more difficult than simply dealing with high temperature, low temperature, lightning, poison, and other injuries. However, this was common sense. It was the same for all conferred knights. The more powerful the effulgence weapon, the more difficult it would be to create. In the future, it would be even more difficult to reach the divine level of effulgence weapon. Although his high-frequency effulgence weapon itself did not have any prowess, once it was loaded onto a physical body to undergo high-frequency tremors, then in theory, as long as the tremor frequency was high enough, there would be nothing that it could not cut through. Nothing that it could not cut through, and nothing that it could not cut through. This was the weapon that Fang Xingjian, who possessed the ability to move at super high speed, needed. It was a pity that after Fang Xingjian had learned the first level of the ether effulgence weapon, he was still unable to create such an effulgence weapon. He could only slowly stabilize the effulgence weapon, slowly increasing the duration of the effulgence weapon's duration. If this were to go on, he had no idea how long he would need to succeed. However, other than the level of the effulgence weapon itself, the strength of the physical weapon was also a crucial factor in limiting the tremor frequency. Fang Xingjian took out another longsword, once again condensing an effulgence weapon and attaching it to his body. Then, with a slash, over 100 streams of sword chi shot out. At the same time, the metal sword in his hand could no longer withstand the pressure and shattered inch by inch, turning into countless fragments that fell onto the ground. However, immediately after, another metal sword was sent to his hand by a sword cheese. Fang Xingjian swept out with his sword again, shattering the long sword, and then another metal sword leaped over. Just like that, Fang Xingjian used the ether effulgence weapon to perform the supreme mistwind sword. With each slash, while condensing the effulgence weapon, it would cause the long sword to shatter and the effulgence weapon to dissipate. He would then use the sword cheese of the supreme mistwind sword to send over a second metal sword, condensing the effulgence weapon once again and slashing out. Just like that, while he was surrounded by several hundred streams of sword cheese, there were also several tens of metal swords dancing in the air around him. Each time he performed a sword technique, the long sword in his hand would be replaced. This allowed him to always be able to use the effulgence weapon in his hand, unleashing an astonishing sharpness. However, each time he performed it, he would need to deplete his physical strength to continuously condense the effulgence weapon. In the blink of an eye, Fang Xingjian was like a typhoon that had descended. The hundreds of metal swords shattered one by one, leaving behind countless sword marks on the ground. Each of the marks was several meters deep into the ground, displaying an unprecedented destructive and slashing prowess. It's a pity that the ether divine art doesn't belong to the category of sword arts. This is especially so for the high-frequency effulgence weapon that I want to create. The tremors make it very unstable. If I want to succeed, I can only slowly polish it, using painstaking efforts to cultivate it, hoping that the day will come when the conditions are right and the effulgence weapon will be formed. However, in the manual for the ether divine art, there's a method to smelt and cast materials and rapidly form the ether effulgence weapon. Maybe I can give it a try. Fang Xingjian sat cross-legged, with the last metal sword placed on his lap. It trembled along with his breathing, flashing with a faint white light. He realized that ever since his Ice Age meditation art had reached level 3, he no longer needed to sleep. This meant that he could use every night to cultivate the ether divine art. With this, he would be cultivating his sword arts and waves at all times, as well as tempering his attributes. The rest of his time will be spent on activating the ether effulgence weapon. There's only over 10 days left before the Academy's practical training outside. Since I've learned most of the sword techniques in the Academy, then it's time for me to learn some other sword techniques and strive for the unparalleled sword intent, as well as brush up on my mental cultivation method. It's best if I can also search for casting materials and see if there are any materials that can aid in the formation of my effulgence weapon. With the improvement of his mental cultivation method, his thinking ability, calculation ability, and memory had all improved tremendously. Now, he did not even need to sleep. Clearly, the continuous improvement of his mental cultivation method was very effective, and it could even increase his efficiency in various aspects. Chapter 125. The next morning, Fang Xingjian, who was sitting cross-legged in the training room, opened his eyes. The long sword in his hand had already turned into dust, dissipating into the air. His effulgence weapon had yet to take form. Therefore, although he had learned it and reached the first level, he was unable to increase his proficiency no matter how much he cultivated. Only after the effulgence weapon had taken form would it continue to increase its proficiency and level up. Fang Xingjian could only grind it bit by bit, hoping that he would be able to form his effulgence weapon one day. Seems like I'll have to try to start with materials and see if I can use the method recorded in the Ether Divine Art to smelt materials into my body to form my high-frequency effulgence weapon. Fang Xingjian now understood the path he should take to become stronger. Cultivating waves, effulgence weapon, and tempering his attributes. All of these could only be slowly grinded over a long period of time. However, his mental cultivation method, sword arts, and sword intents could all be improved. Just as he had decided yesterday, Fang Xingjian woke up early in the morning and ate his breakfast. Then he put on his blue and white knight attire, wearing the small sword pendant exclusive to knights, and headed in the direction of Huang Lin's office. However, on the way there, he saw servants rushing about everywhere in the academy. There were even many soldiers that he had never seen before, and they had set up quite a few checkpoints. It was as if they had gone from peace to war overnight. However, to Fang Xingjian, these soldiers were of no use. They were not even official knights, and were only there to guard the grounds and protect the ordinary people. In fact, the Empire's army had always been dominated by knights. An official knight had the ability to attack an ordinary army of 1,000 people, and 10 knights would be able to take down a city defended by ordinary people. If there were 100 knights, then no matter how many ordinary soldiers there were, they would not be able to win. Therefore, the Empire's main forces had always consisted of 3 to 5 people, over 10 people, or at most 100 knights. It could be said that all the wars in the world were battles involving over 10 people, or at most a few hundred knights. There were only a few wars in history that involved tens of thousands of knights, and all of them were world-shaking. And once divine-level experts took action, a few divine-level experts would be able to decide the outcome of a battle. Therefore, the war in Miracle World was a history of battles between experts. The guards formed by ordinary people were merely used to guard the territory and suppress the ordinary citizens. No one would be stupid enough to use tens of thousands of troops to block the blades of the knights. The true deciding factor was the outcome of the duel between the knights. Therefore, not only were ordinary soldiers poorly equipped, their martial arts skills were average, and most of them did not even have any experience in external combat. Most of their tasks were to chase wild beasts and hunt ferocious beasts. This was because there was no need for them to do anything in the war. Even if they did, they would only be lambs waiting to be slaughtered in front of the knights. Or they could ambush the enemy's non-knight army. But even if they won, it would not affect the duel between knights. The outcome of the war had almost nothing to do with them. It was no wonder that the upper echelons of the Empire never valued the construction of the grassroots army. As Fang Xingjian walked along, he suddenly saw a familiar-looking knight and grabbed him. That knight was also an official student of the academy, and at first he was quite displeased at being grabbed so casually. However, when he turned his head and saw that it was Fang Xingjian, a smile appeared on his face. "Xingjian, it's you." Fang Xingjian nodded and asked, "Why has the academy suddenly become so heavily guarded? Has something happened?" "Oh, you still don't know?" "That's right. You've been focusing on your cultivation and haven't received the news." At this point, that person revealed a furious expression. "It's all because of those black devils. It's that bunch of people on the small island in the Western Sea. I don't know what's going on with those guys from the Western Garrison, but to think that they let those black devils break through the defensive line. I heard that they've already charged into Cursed." It turned out that in the past, there was a huge island about 1,000 kilometers away from the Empire's western coastline. There were many black-skinned humans living on the island. These people claimed to be the descendants of the sun god, and they had established a country called Garcia. Garcia had been plundering the Western Sea for many years, and in the past 10 years or so, they had become even more arrogant. A few years ago, they had even started to plunder the Empire's coastal areas. Wherever they passed by, they would kill and burn, leaving no one alive. Although the Empire was powerful, it was impossible for them to allow the knights to be stationed separately along the long coastline. Therefore, in the past 2 years, they had started to use the strategy of fortifying their defenses and clearing out the wilderness, evacuating many villages near the coastline. The knights from the Western Garrison would then concentrate their attacks and wipe out the enemy's main forces. It was said that a few months ago, the Western garrison had wiped out one of Garcia's main forces. This time around, Garcia's army had gathered with over 300 warriors at the level of knights, and they had attacked the Western garrison. This time around, the Western garrison had been caught off guard, and their defensive line had been broken through by many small squads of the enemy. With so many experts who had grasped extraordinary powers charging over, ordinary villages and towns could not withstand them at all. Within a short period of time, countless citizens of the empire had died under the blades of the foreign races. That night continued. I heard that there have been people who have seen black devils outside Cur City. Now, there are people saying that the Western garrison has sent a letter requesting for the academy to send reinforcements. I'm afraid that we'll have to temporarily join the Western garrison in this battle drill to fight against those black devils. Saying this, hints of killing intent appeared on that person's face. That's for the best. I can't wait any longer. These black devils are just a tiny country, and yet they're causing trouble at the empire's borders, killing our citizens. Fang Xingjian did not continue listening because he knew that he did not have much time left. As the war started, Fang Xingjian knew that with his current abilities, he would not have many opponents at the level of knights. Probably only those core disciples from the great aristocrats and factions would be a match for him. But what kind of place was the battlefield? With several hundred knights fighting it out, there would definitely be enemies at the level of a conferred knight. He urgently needed to increase his abilities. This was especially so after his Ice Age meditation art had consecutively challenged so many prefectural champions and threatened Charlie. It had improved even further. His sword intent was just a little bit away from leveling up. I must achieve a breakthrough before the battle starts. Fang Xingjian knew that as long as he maintained an unrestrained attitude towards his Ice Age meditation art, he would be able to cultivate it faster and faster. This was especially so when he was able to not lower his head and maintain his original state of mind each time he encountered pressure, threats, or difficulties. Each time he maintained his original state of mind, it would mean that he had broken through a bottleneck, allowing his mental cultivation technique to improve further. Cultivating the Ice Age meditation art, Fang Xingjian could not tolerate any injustice in his heart. Therefore, he planned to enter Curse to plunder sword techniques. If he wanted them, he would take them. He would follow his original state of mind without any inhibitions and would not play around in circles. Moreover, he did not have the time to play around. After another 10 days or so, a year would have passed. There were only 4 more years until Fang Xingjian's lifespan came to an end. Of course, there had to be a limit. Otherwise, it would not be following his original state of mind and clearing away all injustice. Instead, it would be foolishness and rashness. The balance between these 2 points was another crucial point in the cultivation of his mental cultivation technique. This way, he could strengthen his mental cultivation technique and collect sword techniques at the same time. Only then would Fang Xingjian have hope of achieving a breakthrough within a short period of time. Just as Fang Xingjian was thinking about this, he once again stepped into Huang Lin's office. He saw a few knights exuding a strong aura and with bloodstains on their knight attire leaving Huang Lin's office. Chapter 126. Just as Fang Xingjian was heading to Huang Lin's office, at the bottom of a volcano in the distance, thick volcanic ash was spewing out incessantly. The ground would occasionally tremble violently, and the surrounding villages had all evacuated far away. Rebecca stood at the foot of the volcano, looking at the great power of nature. She frowned and asked, "Kaunitz is cultivating here? What's the matter for him to get us here in such a hurry?" The servant next to her shook his head and said, "Young master didn't say. He only said that it's an important matter and that we must invite the few of you over for a chat." There were 2 other old men, 1 male and 1 female, who had arrived at the same time as Rebecca. The old man looked to be in his 70s or 80s, but his appearance was simple and unadorned. He was skinny and looked just like an ordinary villager from the mountains. The old lady next to the old man was the complete opposite. She was dressed in luxurious clothes and had the aura of jewels all over her body. She seemed to be even wealthier than Rebecca. However, she also had an air of arrogance on her face, as if there was nothing in the world that was worthy of her attention. This old lady was Rebecca's good friend when she was young, Cynthia, an aristocrat from Green Jade City in the north of the Great Western region. The person next to her was her husband, Zakov, who was extremely henpecked. Hearing the servant's words, Cynthia frowned and said, "Rebecca, this nephew of yours is really too much. As his seniors, we've come all the way here to meet him. It's one thing that he doesn't welcome us personally, but to think that he even puts on airs and wants us to wait for him. He's really disrespectful towards the young and disrespectful." The servant explained in a soft voice, "Madam, it's not that young Master Countess is disrespectful towards his seniors. It's just that his cultivation has reached a critical juncture and he can't come out as he wishes." Umph. A cold gleam flashed in Cynthia's eyes. In her heart, the concept of respect between elders and juniors, clan rules, and the difference between aristocrats and commoners was deeply rooted. What she hated the most was people being disrespectful towards her. Hearing the servant's explanation, she let out a cold laugh and sent a slap across the air. Her reduced force field caused the servant to roll on the ground and spit out blood. She was a knight as well. No, it should be said that she, her husband Zakov, and Rebecca were all knights. Moreover, they had come from aristocratic families and had cultivated for decades. They had eaten countless good things to become knights at the pinnacle. They were among the group of people who were at the very top amongst the first transition knights. After beating up the servant, Cynthia said slowly, "Rebecca, why is it that your Treja clan is becoming more and more like those unruly commoners? Even the servants are so lacking in manners. What right does he have to interrupt us when we are discussing?" The servant quickly covered his face and cried out in pain, "This lowly one deserves to die 10,000 times. This lowly one deserves to die 10,000 times. Please spare this lowly one's life." Rebecca said impatiently, "Get lost first. We'll wait here by ourselves." She then turned to Cynthia and said, "Sister, don't be angry. Countess has gained the first prince's appreciation and has reached a crucial stage in his cultivation. As his seniors, we should just wait a little longer." Humph. Cynthia shook her head. "You're still too soft. If I am in Green Jade City and a junior wants me to wait for him, I will punish him. I heard that there was a genius windstorm sword hero who beat up Countess right in front of you, and even fought with you." Saying this, a look of disdain appeared on her face. "The juniors these days are getting more and more unruly. Only in Cursed can such a boorish person become the prefectural champion." Just then, the surrounding air suddenly distorted, and the temperature suddenly rose by over 10 degrees. It then continued to rise, almost exceeding 100 degrees. The scorching air could scald anyone to death, but to the three experienced knights, it was like soaking in a hot spring. At the same time as the temperature rose, a sulfuric smell came gushing over. All sorts of evil feelings rose in the hearts of the three of them, as if they had suddenly been transported from the mortal world to hell. Haha, Auntie Cynthia is right. That Fong Xinjiang has no respect for his elders, has gone against human ethics, and has no regard for us aristocrats. If we allow such a B** star to grow up, he'll only bring disaster to the empire and bring about endless massacres." As he spoke, Countess slowly walked up to the three old men. His entire body was covered in a layer of pitch-black scale armor, and there were two curved, long horns on his head that pierced into the sky. Each of his 6 arms held a long sword, and all of them exuded violent waves of ether particles. This made him look extremely evil and terrifying, more like a demon from hell than a human. Rebecca was also taken aback, but then her face lit up with joy. "Countess, this is the infernal, indestructible body that the first prince imparted to you." That's right. Countess's face was filled with pride. "I've taken the dragon blood pill and changed my bloodline and bone marrow, achieving a half-human, half-dragon bloodline. I've also pushed the infernal, indestructible body to an unprecedented level 13 perfection. Right now, Not only do I have the strength of a dragon, but I also have the devil's nerves, increases one's reaction and movement speed. The Earth's heart, super strong recovery ability, able to absorb the power of the Earth's heat, and one's stamina is almost inexhaustible. The monster's muscles, increases one's explosive prowess and muscle contraction speed when one's stamina is depleted by several times, and many other specialties. Right now, although my 5 attributes have only just broken through 50 points, the effects I can display are equivalent to those of Knight with 70 or even 80 points. Clearly, the news of Feng Xingjian being crippled had caused the first prince to direct many of the resources he had intended to nurture Feng Xingjian to Countess. Just the 10 dragon blood pills alone had allowed Countess to have an increase of over 20 points in his attributes. Even the first prince would not be able to take out so many resources casually. However, the effects were extraordinary. Within the short span of a month, Countess's bandits had improved tremendously. It was comparable to 5 years of Countess's hard work. Hearing his words, the arrogant Cynthia nodded and said, as expected of the royal family, to be able to spend so much money, even if the many clans in our cold Jade City were to join forces, we probably wouldn't be able to achieve this. Such means are already close to the divine level. It seems that within a few years, our empire will have another divine level character. In Countess's body, the first prince's clone frowned slightly and sent a cold message to Countess. All right, let's cut the crap. Let's get down to business. Countess smiled and said, with the first prince's boldness and means, this is just a small matter to him. This time around, the reason why I've invited the 3 elders over is to discuss the matter regarding Feng Xingjian. The first prince hopes that we can make use of this opportunity to hunt down the Garcia people to get the 3 of you to help me raise my level and reach the pinnacle of level 19 as soon as possible. Another thing is to suppress Feng Xingjian and get him to sign the Devil's Note. Chapter 127. You're here. Huang Lin lifted his head and looked at Feng Xingjian, his eyes filled with fatigue. Feng Xingjian asked, Teacher, is there going to be a war? Huang Lin nodded. The Western garrison has requested for us to cooperate with them and join forces to wipe out that bunch of black devils in Garcia. We'll be moving out at the end of this month. You should make some preparations as well. At the end of the month, Feng Xingjian did some calculations. With that, he will be moving out in 8 days' time. Thinking of this, he said, Teacher, I'd like to take a few days off and make a trip to Cursed City. Huang Lin was surprised. To the city? What are you planning to do? Feng Xingjian already had an excuse. My mental cultivation method has reached a bottleneck. I'd like to change my environment and mentality to see if I can comprehend something. Mental cultivation method. Huang Lin nodded. Mental cultivation method is everyone's own matter. I can't help you with this. You could go to Cursed to have a look. He believed that with Feng Xingjian's current status, no one would dare to offend him. Even if he were to go to Cursed, there should not be any trouble. Therefore, that afternoon, Feng Xingjian went through the procedures in the academy and left the academy with his sword, heading straight for Cursed. He had 3 goals this time around: to collect sword arts to improve his mental cultivation method, and to look for materials to complement his effulgence weapon. The Ice Age meditation art that Feng Xingjian was currently cultivating was focused on calming his heart and mind, with no taboos. However, he was not like an ordinary person who adjusted his mental state and calmed his heart. Instead, he killed external demons, getting rid of all the things that could disturb his state of mind, so as to calm his heart and mind. Although he had been stripped of his love, kinship, and friendship, he still had hatred, anger, and a sense of right and wrong. Therefore, when he encountered many things, he would still not be used to it and would still feel anger. Therefore, that night, he took off his night attire and changed into a set of tattered clothes. With the silver dragon at his waist and a metal sword in his hand, he ran to the slums in Cursed. In this world, the poorer a place was, the more chaotic it would be, and the more injustice there would be. Unlike in the academy, who would dare to provoke Feng Xingjian now? This time around, Feng Xingjian wanted to test it out. He wanted to see if he could take the initiative to provoke others and then calmly slay external demons. This would allow his mental cultivation method to grow. However, after circling around the slums a few times, no one came to provoke him. Most people would be secretly vigilant when they saw the long sword in his hand. How could they casually provoke him? This was a world where everyone was cultivating and countless people were trying to become knights. Who knew if the person holding a sword on the streets was Wei Xiaobao or Shimen Shueishue? Thus, most people would not provoke those who were holding weapons. However, the slums were, after all, the slums. Fang Xingjian wandered around a few times. Although no one provoked him, his ears twitched slightly, and he could already hear the sound waves coming from the air. It was the sound of women crying and begging for mercy. "No, please don't do this." Fang Xingjian's silhouette moved, and then he disappeared silently. In a commoner's house, a 14 or 15-year-old girl's hands were tied, and her feet were held down by a woman. A man in his 40s touched the girl's cheek, and his face lit up with excitement. At the next moment, he started to tear off the girl's clothes and knead her body. The girl kept on crying and struggling, but she was slapped 5 to 6 times consecutively by the man until she was stunned. The man grinned coldly and tore off the girl's outer clothes. Just as he was about to unleash his violence on the girl's chest, 2 streams of sword cheese came gushing over, knocking him and the girl who was pressing down on the girl's legs onto the bed. The man's physique was not bad. After all, this was Miracle World. If he was in modern Earth, his physique would be enough to be an Olympic champion. He jumped up abruptly, pulled out a small knife, and pointed it at Fang Xingjian, who was at the door. He put on a tough front and said, "Lad, what are you doing? How dare you spoil Grandpa True's plans? Do you want to have a few more holes on your body?" He had yet to realize how he had fallen to the ground. Fang Xingjian threw a glance at him, then looked at the girl behind him. He realized that the girl was pregnant and had been sent to the ground by his sword cheese, unable to get up for a long time. Hearing the man's words, sword light flashed in the air. The man let out an agonizing cry, and one of his ears fell to the ground. "I'll kill whoever's making a racket." In that instant, the entire room fell silent. The man looked at Fang Xingjian with a terrified expression. The young girl who had been killed also stopped crying and looked at Fang Xingjian in fear. Fang Xingjian pointed at the young girl and asked, "Tell me, what happened?" The young girl took a few deep breaths. Under the pressure of Fang Xingjian's knight, she was no longer nervous. She said tearfully, "I saw that pregnant girl on the road." She suddenly squatted down, saying that her stomach hurt so much that she couldn't walk. "I sent her home. Who knew? Who knew?" At this point, she started crying again. Fang Xingjian's eyes gleamed coldly as he looked at the man and woman at the side. The woman's expression was one of terror, while the man's expression was one of panic. He had wanted to lie and defend himself, but under Fang Xingjian's gaze, his teeth kept on chattering, and he was unable to say a single lie. Fang Xingjian snorted coldly. His sword light flashed continuously, slashing off the man's hands. Leaving behind the man who was crying and screaming in agony, Fang Xingjian then glanced at the pregnant girl and said coldly, "Seeing that you're pregnant, I won't kill you today. However, you'll have to atone for your sins. If I find out that you've committed any more evil deeds in the future, I'll definitely wipe out your entire family." The woman immediately knelt on the ground and kept on kowtowing. Fang Xingjian snorted coldly and dashed out like he was riding on a cloud. As for the girl, she would naturally go out on her own. Fang Xingjian believed that the couple would not dare to do anything else. Moreover, Fang Xingjian only had hatred to begin with. Hatred towards evil. How could there be any love towards kindness? When he killed people and slayed evil, it was merely to slay external demons and sweep away the injustice in his heart. It had absolutely nothing to do with compassion or kindness. If one had to make a comparison, his current state was more similar to the uncompromising Punisher or Rorschach, rather than Superman or Batman, who would save both good and bad people. The night sky of Miracle World was different from that of Earth. Other than a bright moon, there were no stars at all. The entire sky was pitch black, as if endless darkness had covered the world. Fang Xingjian thought about what had happened earlier and looked at his stats window. He discovered that his mental cultivation method had improved by 0.1%. He then killed a few thieves, robbers, and gang members. While he was feeling depressed, he once again increased his proficiency by about 0.2%. However, after this, he increasingly felt that Miracle World was barbaric and backward. There was too much darkness and evil in the middle and lower classes, causing him to feel extremely displeased. Even though his mental cultivation method had improved, he still felt displeased. As long as one had a normal view of right and wrong, they would not feel happy after seeing things like rape, theft, extortion, and extortion. Anyone who came from modern society would not feel happy when they came to this world that was similar to the Dark Middle Ages and saw all sorts of ugliness in human nature. Although Fang Xingjian no longer had love, kinship, or friendship, his view of right and wrong had not changed greatly. Most of the knights and confer knights in Miracle World are gathered in the academies and the military. Most of them are getting stronger just to fight for more authority, more resources, and greater wealth. How many of them would turn their gazes toward the darkness of the world? If I were to be like that, cultivating only to become stronger and seek revenge, wouldn't I also become a person who only seeks fame and fortune? The world is not peaceful, and external demons are invading. How can I feel happy? How can I remain calm? Fang Xingjian frowned slightly, and the mental cultivation method in his mind circulated rapidly. Many thoughts kept popping up and disappearing. I've been oppressed by the Fang clan for 16 years, and my heart has never been free. If I have to endure all sorts of oppression in the future, what difference would there be between me and the Fang clan? Thinking of the Fang clan, of his grandmother, and of that dark-skinned woman who had harmed him, the flames in Fang Xingjian's heart burned even brighter. If I can't use the sword in my hand to clear away the injustice in my heart and realize what I want, then no matter how high my sword arts or how strong I am, what do they count for? At the thought of this, it was as if streams of silver thunderbolt had exploded in Fang Xingjian's empty mind. The mental cultivation method in his mind tightened, and he felt a myriad of thoughts flooding in. He had a strong urge to raise the long sword in his hand and kill all the evildoers in the world. When I kill, why would I care about the time and place? I only want to feel happy. If I want to kill, I kill. If I want to kill, I kill. My sword only moves according to my heart. Chapter 128. The moment Fang Xingjian thought of the various injustices and darkness in the world, the circulation of his mental cultivation method became faster and faster. He let out a long breath, as if wanting to exhale all the pent-up frustrations in his heart. It's just that I feel injustice after seeing those dregs. If I can't kill them and get rid of the injustice in my heart, no matter how high my sword arts or how strong I am, I won't feel happy. If I can't even realize my own thoughts and ideas, no matter how strong I am, I won't feel happy. At this moment, on Fang Xingjian's stats window, a blurry phantom image appeared on the Ice Age meditation art, as if it could change at any moment. Different from the physical body, mental cultivation methods, which were a person's spirit and thoughts, could be comprehended. In order to achieve success in the physical body, one would need to train hard day and night, continuously tempering every piece of muscle and every bone. However, a person's consciousness was illusory and could change at will. Therefore, a person might develop a different view of the world due to the influence of the environment over the years, but it was also possible for them to gain an epiphany under the stimulation of certain matters and thoughts. Therefore, when Fang Xingjian cultivated waves, he had spent over a month to change his waves, turning the Mistral wind god's waves into the Sonido sword zephyr waves. And now, with a change in his thoughts, the Ice Age meditation art had started to change. Once the thoughts in his mind settled down, the mental cultivation method might start to change. Moreover, it was still possible for the waves to revert back to the changes in his physical body. However, how difficult would it be to revert back to the changes in his thoughts? It was like a monk who had committed the sin of abstaining from lust. It was impossible to get him to forget his lust and return to his original innocence. Or a homicidal maniac who had killed hundreds of people. How difficult would it be to get him to forget about killing, put down the butcher's knife, and become a Buddha? Once the mental cultivation method was taken, it would be hard to revert back. However, Feng Xingjian did not regret this. His method of cultivating the Ice Age meditation art was different from others. If he had to cut off his desires like others and endure the disturbances in his thoughts, what would be the point of living? Although the way he had killed off external disturbances to calm his mind had allowed his proficiency level to rise very quickly, as long as he persevered, the change in his mental cultivation method was something that would happen naturally. But how could Feng Xingjian regret it? If I were to follow the original method of the Ice Age meditation technique and train myself into a tortoise or an ice mountain, I might as well just die. At this moment, Feng Xingjian had made up his mind to go out and roam the world in the future. He would punish the evildoers and use this to kill external demons. He would accumulate external skills and seek peace of mind in order to improve his mental cultivation. Thinking of this, Feng Xingjian only felt that his entire body seemed to have become carefree, as if every muscle and every bone had become lively and agile. Because this was what he thought. When he saw disgusting people, he wanted to kill them all with a single sword strike. The mental cultivation method on the interface began to blur, as if it could change at any time. Looking at the changes on the stats window, Feng Xingjian thought to himself, "Fine, I'll give you another helping hand. I'll first complete the mental cultivation method before looking for sword techniques and materials." The next moment, he darted away and soon arrived at the back alley of a tavern. There, he saw 3 well-built members of a gang holding weapons. Curse gangs were all people who cultivated in martial arts, but were unable to pass the prefectural selection. They could only be sandwiched between the aristocrats and the commoners, making a living by exploiting the commoners. The 3 of them only saw a blur before Feng Xingjian's figure appeared before them. The 3 of them were on guard, and the young man in the lead said, "Brother, may I know why you're looking for our Firecrow gang?" The Firecrow gang was considered a small gang in Cursed, with only over 10 members. They usually looked after 2 streets and relied on collecting protection fees to protect the businesses in the vicinity from the harassment of hooligans. Sometimes they would help to catch thieves and chase after debts to make a living. Although they were a gang, they were not considered to be evil. Feng Xingjian nodded and flicked out his finger. Sword cheese slashed across the faces of the 3 of them. The 3 of them froze in an instant. To be able to create gang cheese and sword cheese with just a flick of their fingers. This was clearly something that only a strong knight could do. The 3 of them immediately broke into flattering smiles and asked, "May I know which Lord Knight it is? What matter do you need our Firecrow gang to do?" Feng Xingjian said coldly, "Tell me which evil people and gangs are there in Cursed." The 3 of them were stunned, and before they could react, they saw Feng Xingjian lightly flicking his fingernails, letting out a crisp metallic sound. In an instant, they broke out in cold sweat. They quickly said, "If we're talking about evil people and gangs, then it's naturally the Viper Jerry and his Viper gang." The 3 of them said in detail, "The Viper Gang's Jerry is a martial artist who has been cultivating for over 30 years and is now almost 40 years old. His martial arts can be considered one of the best in Cursed. Of course, he can't be compared to Lord Knights like you." Back then, Jerry was also focused on pursuing martial arts, wanting to take the Knight's examination. However, he failed for many years and was disheartened. He then brought a group of martial brothers and set up the Viper Gang. Things got out of hand, and in the blink of an eye, it became one of Cursed big gangs. Although there are so many gangs in Cursed, everyone is a local and usually sees each other all the time. They only collect some protection fees and extort money from some unlucky people. However, Jerry's Viper Gang is different. They often force women into prostitution and kidnap people. It's not like they haven't robbed houses, killed people, and committed arson before. Feng Xingjian frowned. "Do you have any examples of this?" "Why not? That person said they bought a bunch of kids from God knows where, and they've been begging for food and money in the aristocratic district. They've even broken the children's legs and dug out their eyes, just to act pitiful and ask for money from the aristocratic ladies. Who in Cursed doesn't know about this? Last year, a couple came looking for them and found their child. They made a big fuss and wanted to report this to the city lord residents. In the end, they were buried the next day. The weeds in front of their graves are probably all over their waist now. It's not just these things. Another person said, the youngest daughter of the Harrison family in the east of the city was born with great beauty. She was so pretty and likable. However, the Viper Gang's hoodlums came to propose marriage and kidnapped her. The next day, she committed suicide by hanging herself. Fang Xingjian listened to them talking about the Viper Gang's evil deeds. Each of them had a start and end, and did not seem to be making things up. However, it was precisely because of this that the cold gleam in his eyes grew stronger and stronger, and he found it hard to quell the anger in his heart. Fang Xingjian asked, with the Viper Gang doing this, is there no one who can deal with them? Someone laughed strangely and said, they have people backing them up. How can ordinary commoners deal with them? When have those aristocrats ever cared about our lives? Even if there were thousands or tens of thousands of our lives, in their eyes, they wouldn't even be comparable to a finger of theirs. Enough. I'll go and find out if what you've said is right or wrong. If I find out that there's anything that isn't true, I'll come back and chop off all your limbs. When Fang Xingjian said this, it was as if there was a cold gust of wind gushing out from the gaps between his teeth. The three of them shivered, but they soon stopped and said, Sir, please go ahead and verify it. There's nothing false about what we've said earlier. The Viper Gang is the accomplice of the evildoer and has committed heinous crimes. No matter how much we say, it's not even a tenth of what they've said. Fang Xingjian narrowed his eyes, and his silhouette disappeared with the wind at the next moment, leaving the three of them looking at each other, as if they had never appeared. Chapter 129. On the north side of Ker's Commoner District, there was a two-story building erected there. Although it was a commoner district, the building's decorations were exquisite. The ground was covered with black and white ceramic tiles, and the outer walls were painted with a layer of golden paint. Under the illumination of over 100 torches, it gave off a feeling of nobility and rustic. This was the biggest, money-squandering den that the venomous Serpent Gang had set up in Cursed. Gambling, women, and alcohol could all be found here. Not only ordinary merchants, but even many masters and young masters from the aristocratic districts could be seen here. Although it was already late at night, the place was still brightly lit. Carriages could be seen parked everywhere, and men and women were entering and exiting. Fang Xingjian walked in through the main door. The moment he entered, a young man with a white beard came up to him. Although he looked at Fang Xingjian's tattered clothes with slight disdain, he hid it very well on his face. He chuckled and said, Young master, is this your first time here? Would you like to play some chess and cards? Or would you like to have a chat with the ladies? Fang Xingjian did not say a word and walked straight to the hall. He saw over 10 mahjong tables there, and curses, cheers, men berating, and women teasing could be heard everywhere. The pungent smell of cigarettes and alcohol assaulted his nostrils, causing Fang Xingjian to frown uncontrollably. Lowering his head to look at the smiling young man beside him, Fang Xingjian could not be bothered to speak to him. He kicked the young man to the ground and said, Get someone in charge to talk to me. That young man was kicked to the ground, feeling a pain in his chest as if a few of his ribs had been broken. He immediately cried out like a pig being slaughtered. Men, someone's here to cause trouble. Someone's here to cause trouble. Over 10 burly men walked over. All of them had the backs of a tiger and waists of a bear, looking very strong. They were all men who had practiced martial arts all year round, but were not qualified to become knights. Lad, are you courting death? You dare to cause trouble in the venomous Serpent Gang's territory? The few burly men were not in a hurry. They walked over slowly, looking curiously and amused at Fang Xingjian, who looked to be only 16 or 17 years old and was dressed in tattered clothes. No matter how they looked at it, they did not think that a little boy like him would be in any danger. Many gamblers at the side also looked over. When they saw Fang Xingjian's silence, they all laughed out loud. "Young man, you're really bold. Ah, big bear, just beat him up a little. He's just a kid." When Fang Xingjian saw the muscular man walking over with a ferocious smile, he coldly glared at him and kicked him in the chest. The muscular man screamed in pain and flew more than 10 meters away, crashing into a card table. "Damn, he's trained. Everyone, let's kill him together. Do you think that you can cause trouble in our venomous serpent gang just because you've learned a few moves? Who here doesn't practice martial arts?" The burly men at the side cursed and charged forward. Fang Xingjian looked at them coldly. His hands did not move, or rather, he felt that it was beneath him to make a move. He continued to raise his leg and kick. After images of his leg filled the air, and within a second, he had kicked over 10 burly men to the ground, smashing more than half of the card table. A few gamblers even rolled on the ground. Various screams and wails instantly filled the entire hall, and the rest of the gamblers also quietened down in an instant. The young man, who had been screaming nonstop earlier, was so frightened that his legs trembled, and he crawled away on all fours. Fang Xingjian followed the instructions of the 3 members of the Fire Crow gang and investigated a little. After confirming the matter regarding the venomous serpent gang, after finding out that the venomous serpent gang had committed all sorts of crimes, including human trafficking and forcing women into prostitution, he immediately felt a wave of resentment in his chest that was difficult to quell. Therefore, he had rushed over here. His next step was to use the venomous serpent gang as an offering to his sword to complete his mental cultivation method. After kicking over 10 burly men to the ground in an instant, Fang Xingjian pulled a chair over and sat down in an imposing manner. A member of the gang who was in charge of guarding the place stood out furiously and fearfully. He had not participated in Fang Xingjian's encirclement earlier and had thus not been injured. He looked at Fang Xingjian and said, "Who exactly are you? Has our venomous serpent gang offended you in any way?" "You guys have not offended me," Fang Xingjian said coldly, "but you guys have done all sorts of bad things. If I don't kill all of you, I won't feel happy." That person was stunned, looking at Fang Xingjian as if he was looking at an idiot. He laughed out loud and said, "So you're an idiot? You think that just because you've learned some martial arts, you can uphold justice and punish evil?" Fang Xingjian said calmly, "I'm not thinking of upholding justice. I just want to kill all of you so that I can feel happy." That person nodded. "All right, then if you have the guts, wait here. Our brothers from the venomous serpent gang will be here in a while. I want to see how you're going to kill us." With that said, he turned to leave, wanting to call for help. However, just as he turned, a whistling sound rang out and a chair smashed into his leg, breaking his thigh. Seeing him hugging his leg and screaming on the ground, Fang Xingjian said coldly, "Did I say you can leave?" Those who are not from the venomous serpent gang can all scram. At the next moment, a large number of gamblers and patrons immediately ran out. In the blink of an eye, only the gang members who had fallen to the ground and a few burly men who did not know whether to stand or leave were left in the hall. They were the gang members who had not attacked Fang Xingjian, but right now, they did not dare to fight against Fang Xingjian. However, they were afraid that their boss would blame them and were unwilling to leave. Fang Xingjian did not care about them and just sat on the chair, waiting quietly. About 20 minutes later, the sound of many footsteps rang out incessantly. Over 100 burly men charged in with axes, machetes, and clubs in their hands. They surrounded Fang Xingjian and looked coldly at him, who was still seated on the chair. The burly man whose leg had been broken by Fang Xingjian earlier was also helped up. It was as if he felt a sense of security from having so many people around. He pointed at Fang Xingjian furiously and said, "Lad, continue being arrogant. No matter how good you are at fighting, can you win against so many of us?" Although he knew that Fang Xingjian should be very powerful, Fang Xingjian looked far too young. He had only treated Fang Xingjian as an ordinary level 9 expert. How could he have thought that Fong Xingjian was a 16-year-old genius knight? Right now, feeling that victory was in his grasp, he pointed at Fong Xingjian and scolded, "Be ***starred. You dare to come and create trouble for our venomous serpent gang? Lads, chop off his limbs. I'm going to feed him to the dogs." However, just then, Fong Xingjian asked, "All of you want to kill me?" The leader laughed out loud and said, "Why? Are you scared? It's too late to tell you. Chop him up." Fong Xingjian looked at over 100 people charging toward him and only stood up slowly. Streams of air currents exploded from his body as his reduced force field blasted out without any restraints. Fong Xingjian simply walked one round around the hall, and all the thugs were lying on the ground with their limbs broken. Agonizing cries rang out. It was like hell on earth. The leader was stunned, and his smiling expression turned into boundless fear. Knight? Knight! He clearly had some knowledge and knew about the knight's reduced force field. Chapter 130. Fong Xingjian walked up to him slowly and asked, "Where's your boss? Why isn't he here? Where is he?" It turned out that the boss of the venomous serpent gang, Jerry, was a cautious person. Despite knowing that there were people creating trouble, he did not step out personally and only called his subordinates over. Being stared at by him, the leader trembled all over, unable to say a single word. Fong Xingjian frowned and was about to ask another question when a large number of footsteps rang out from outside the door. "All of you, stop it! Are you guys thinking of rebelling?" Tens of soldiers from the city guards institution dashed in. However, when they saw the groaning soldiers on the ground, they were all stunned. The leader frowned and dashed toward Fong Xingjian, shouting, "Who are you? What on earth has happened here?" The leader, who had been scared silly, seemed as if he had found a life-saving straw. He hugged onto a soldier's thigh and shouted, "Save me! Save me! This person is going to kill people. Save me!" Looking at this scene, the leader of the city guard immediately frowned and looked toward Fong Xingjian. For a moment, he could not figure out Fong Xingjian's identity. Although the leader of the venomous serpent gang had intentionally not revealed the fact that Fong Xingjian had performed his reduced force field, seeing so many people lying on the ground, how could he not know that Fong Xingjian was not a simple person? Therefore, he squeezed out a hint of a smile and said, "May I know who you are? Why don't we talk in private?" However, Fong Xingjian did not give him any face. He threw him a sideways glance and said, "You're the one in charge of the venomous serpent gang's territory, right? You've really put in a lot of effort to make such a good place a mess." How could the captain not hear the sarcasm in Fong Xingjian's words? However, the more Fong Xingjian acted this way, the more he did not dare to look down on him. He bowed and said with a smile, "Sir, you must be joking. May I know how the venomous serpent gang has offended you?" With that, he stuffed a bag of money into Fong Xingjian's hands. Fong Xingjian let out a cold snort and slapped away the palm that Fong Xingjian had secretly extended to him, saying coldly, "Tell the venomous serpent gang's leader, Jerry, to come here within 2 hours to receive his punishment. Otherwise, if I personally take action, things won't be so simple. You work for Hogan, right? The venomous serpent gang appeared in your territory. After I'm done with Jerry, I'll settle the score with you." The captain's expression was a little ugly. He had already given Fong Xingjian enough face and performed the necessary etiquette, but Fong Xingjian did not care about his face at all. He had even mentioned the director of the city guards institution, Hogan, but Fong Xingjian did not seem to care about him at all. This made the captain even more confused about Fong Xingjian's intentions, and he could only slowly retreat. The captain then asked, "Sir, you should at least tell us your name so that we know what to do next, right?" However, Fong Xingjian had already closed his eyes, completely ignoring the captain's question. The captain could only walk out of the hall, his expression grim. He frowned as he tried to think which immortal this person was. A soldier with a big build who had been following at the back quietly walked up. It was eldest Marshal Brother Ogden, who had left the School of Sword Arts. He looked at the captain and said, "Captain, the person in the gambling den seems to be Fong Xingjian." "What? The captain anxiously asked. "Are you sure?" Ogden said. "A few of our brothers have gone to watch the academy's competition. If you don't believe me, you can ask them." The captain asked again, and, as expected, a few of them felt that the man sitting in the gambling den was Fong Xingjian. The captain smiled bitterly. To think that it's this important person, a 16-year-old windstorm sword hero. "There's no way we can handle this matter." He said to one of his subordinates, "Go and report this to Jerry. Get him to reveal his backing as soon as possible, lest things get out of hand." He then thought of what Fong Xingjian had said earlier, and said with a shiver, "Come, let's go look for Boss Hogan. We can't interfere in a fight between immortals." Fong Xingjian had been waiting in the hall, and the leader had also calmed down. Looking at Fong Xingjian, there was not only fear in his eyes, but also hatred. However, with Fong Xingjian watching over him and the rest of the gang, there was no one who could save them. They could only bear with the pain and stay there, occasionally letting out cries of agony. An hour later, Hogan walked in with an elderly man. Behind them, there were 7 burly men with strong physiques who did not look like good people. Hogan shook his head and smiled. "Xingjian, oh Xingjian, why didn't you inform us that you've come cursed?" Looking at the injured people lying on the ground, he smiled bitterly and said, "What are you doing here?" Fong Xingjian did not say a word. He only looked at the elderly man next to Hogan and the 7 burly men behind him, asking, "Which one of them is Jerry?" The elderly man smiled and pointed to a bearded middle-aged man who was blind in one eye, and said, "This is Jerry, the current boss of the venomous serpent gang. The other 6 are his brothers, who are also the upper echelon of the venomous serpent gang." Fong Xingjian threw him a glance and asked, "And who are you?" Hogan introduced, "Haha, this is Old Master Edgar. He's also a knight with long experience in Cursed, and also the current head of the Edgar clan." As he spoke, his lips moved slightly, sending a message to Fong Xingjian through the reduced force field. "Xingjian, the venomous serpent gang is backed by Edgar. They're one of Cursed aristocrats. Their clan isn't big, unlike Treja, who can set up an academy or run a business. Therefore, they're just trying to get some unorthodox methods. Bringing you the upper echelon of the venomous serpent gang is already giving you a lot of face. If you kill these 7 people, we'll forget about this matter. Old Master Edgar admires your talent. You can have a good chat with him." Fong Xingjian ignored Hogan's message and looked at Edgar, asking in a clear voice, "Old man, you're the one backing Jerry's venomous serpent gang?" Seeing Fong Xingjian ask so directly, Edgar, who had been smiling earlier, froze up and immediately felt a little awkward. He had not expected that Fong Xingjian would ask this question in front of over 100 people on the ground. Hogan's countenance was also a little grim as he continued to send a message. "Xingjian, what are you doing?" Fong Xingjian only stared at Edgar and said, "Then do you know that this be **starred Jerry abducts and sells children from other places, tortures them, breaks their limbs, and makes them beg for food? He even forces women into prostitution, abducts girls from other places, and makes them sell their bodies. Once their beauty declines and their bodies can no longer take it, he throws them out to fend for themselves. Do you know how many people in Cursed have had their families broken up because of their existence, and how many people want to kill them?" Edgar smiled awkwardly, looking at Fong Xingjian with a baffled expression and saying, "I have no relations with them. How would I know what the venomous serpent gang has done?" Hogan was infuriated as he continued to send a message. "What on earth are you trying to do? It's not like Cursed is the only place that has these gangs. There's no place in the world that lacks people who do dirty work. Even if you wipe out the venomous serpent gang, there's still the fire serpent gang, the ice serpent gang, and the black serpent gang. Can you wipe them all out? At least they're still under our control. As long as they don't do anything out of line, keeping them around is better than having another gang that's not easy to control. Do you know that once we wipe them out, there will be so many gangs vying for the positions they've vacated? How many people will die? Only by doing this will the commoners be able to settle down, and there will be chaos." Chapter 131. Fong Xingjian looked into Hogan's eyes and said coldly, If you have something to say, just say it. Don't send me voice transmissions. Seeing that Hogan was dead, Fong Xingjian continued. If we destroy them, will there still be gangs? That's why it's not destroyed. What about the people they harmed? What about them? Fong Xingjian shook his head. The children who died in their hands, the girls who were ruined by them. Are we just going to let them go because you're afraid that there will be more gangs, because you're afraid that more gangs will fight and do bad things, and because you want to stabilize the situation, you're tolerating the evil people now? By doing this, by compromising with them, isn't it because of the bad guys' mistakes that the good guys have to pay? How could I do such a cowardly thing? This is just a choice made because I'm afraid of trouble and pressure. If I want to kill someone, how could I back down because of this? The more Fong Xingjian spoke, the clearer the thoughts in his mind became. It was as if a layer of fog that had been shrouding his brain was dispelled. It could be said that the clouds were dispelled to reveal the sun. The mental cultivation method in his consciousness continued to circulate, and the blurriness on the stats window changed rapidly. The words Ice Age Meditation Art could no longer be seen. Hogan also became angry. He looked at Fong Xingjian and said angrily, "Then what do you want to do? Kill all the bad guys? Are you a child? Was that even possible? What are laws and governments for? If everyone was like you, then the country would no longer be a country. For the entire country, stability was more important than anything else. What we can do is try our best to control them, maintain stability, and suppress the crimes within a reasonable range. Do you know how many innocent people will die if you kill so casually? Those innocent people who died have nothing to do with me." Fong Xingjian looked into Hogan's eyes and said coldly, "I only kill those who deserve to be killed. If the other gangs start fighting and killing each other because of their deaths, that's the fault of the other gangs. It's the fault of these villains. Are we to be blamed? The mistakes of bad people should not be borne by good people, nor should they be compromised. Since they've made mistakes again, we should kill them again until they admit their mistakes." Fong Xingjian only felt that after he finished speaking, his heart was filled with joy. It was as if there were streaks of silver lightning in his mind that split apart all the darkness. The mental cultivation method on the interface became more and more stable, as if it had already begun to form words. He said in a clear voice, "You don't even understand these principles. You can't even stick to your own ideas, and you still want to compromise with these weak and evil trash. What kind of knight are you?" Hogan sneered and said, "You make it sound nice. Do you think the people you killed are evil? They don't have wives, parents, or children. What would you do if you caused the situation to be in turmoil because of your indiscriminate killing and caused the people to seethe with resentment? You're just satisfying yourself by killing indiscriminately. Well, have you ever considered ordinary people? They are just ordinary people, unlike us knights who have iron wills and can sweep away all evil. Therefore, they cannot be blamed for favoritism. However, he would not blame them for their favoritism. And if they still want to take revenge on me after I've killed them, then I'll punish them if they deserve it. I won't let them off just because they're ordinary people or because they're weak. How can I change my mind and compromise with these Beastars just because of other people's threats?" Saying this, Fong Xingjian's mind became blank. An unprecedented comprehension rose up in his chest. This is my way of thinking. This is my true heart. This is the real me. However, Hogan sneered and said, "Then what's wrong and what's right? What's evil and what's justice? There are so many thieves, robbers, and prostitutes in this world. How many of them have ulterior motives? There are so many knights, so which one of them has not killed before? How do you judge? There will naturally be a fair judgment on right and wrong. The so-called inability to differentiate clearly is just a result of benefits." Fong Xingjian said, "I want to use my own sword arts to sweep away all external evils, to clean up the world, and to sweep away all the injustice in my heart. Then you want to use your own view of right and wrong to override everyone else's view of right and wrong." Hogan clearly disagreed with Fong Xingjian's words. However, he looked at Fong Xingjian and sensed the strange aura that had suddenly risen up from his body. He suddenly said, "You've changed your mental cultivation method?" Fang Xingjian recalled the many years of oppression he had suffered, the feeling of his soul being oppressed and unable to be liberated when he was in the Fang clan. He said calmly, "For so many years, I didn't have enough power and couldn't even be myself. Now that I've cultivated sword arts and my abilities are getting stronger and stronger, I have less and less apprehension when I do things. However, if I can't even be myself, can't even maintain my heart, and have to allow others to twist and oppress me, then what's the point of cultivating so many sword arts and becoming so powerful?" Fang Xingjian said coldly, "I want to be the person who cleans up the world. Naturally, I need to have a heart that can take on the world. I'm willing to take on all the rights and wrongs in this world." After saying this, an explosive bang rang out in Fang Xingjian's mind, as if a myriad of silver snakes had suddenly exploded. He then looked at the mental cultivation method on his stats window. It had already changed from its original blurry state to the first two words. They were the two words sword sweep. However, the latter part was still blurry, making it hard to tell what it represented. However, just by looking at it, Fang Xingjian could sense a sharp aura gushing toward him. He could sense an unbelievably powerful power brewing within it, waiting for the day to see the light of day once again. He then did not continue to look at the changes to his mental cultivation method in detail. Instead, he turned his gaze toward Edgar, Jerry, and the others. Edgar had already realized that something was not right during their conversation earlier. However, he held on to his status and did not leave. Instead, he waited for the two of them to finish their conversation before asking, "Fang Xingjian, what on earth do you want? Do you still care about the Empire's laws and regulations?" "What I want? When I, Fang Xingjian, do things, no one can restrain me. I only do it for the peace of my heart." Fang Xingjian slowly drew out the long sword in his hand, and an unusually sharp sword intent seeped out from his body. Hogan suddenly felt as if something had exploded in his mind. He bellowed, "Run!" However, it was too late. Fang Xingjian's longsword swept out, and streams of pale, white sword cheese swept out like sword light. Other than Hogan, who was not attacked, Jerry and the other 6 non-night level members seemed to have been swept by invisible sharp swords. They were turned into over 100 pieces, exploding into a pool of blood. As a senior knight in the clan, although Edgar was not comparable to Rebecca, he was definitely at the level of a senior instructor like Zadeh. However, Fang Xingjian had used his unparalleled sword intent to push the supreme Mistwind sword, and the dense sword cheese shot out like lasers. Over 10 streams of sword cheese slashed at the openings on his body through the air, causing him to be covered in blood as he retreated while crying out in pain. With Fang Xingjian's sword cheese sweeping out wildly, together with his unparalleled sword intent, even though Edgar was comparable to a senior knight like Zadeh, he was still unable to fend off the attack. It could be seen how much power Fang Xingjian had held back during his spar with Zadeh, and how profound his sword arts had become. It was likely that he would be hard-pressed to find a match for him within the first transition. Even so, with the protection of his reduced force field and night attire, as well as his own abilities, Edgar was only injured and was not in any danger to his life. Hogan clenched his teeth and stood in front of Fang Xingjian, saying, "Do you know that this move of yours is equivalent to making an enemy out of all the aristocrats and cursed? Just for this lousy mental cultivation technique. Is it worth it?" Fang Xingjian shook his head. "It's not that I'm making an enemy out of them. These people only have themselves to blame." He threw a glance at Edgar and said calmly, "Today, I'll spare your life. But as long as I find out that you were the one who had connived with the venomous serpent gang's actions, and that you were not unaware of it, I'll come and take your life again." He then looked at Hogan. "Hogan, don't let me find out that you're still related to these matters. Otherwise, my sword will show no mercy." With that, Fang Xingjian's silhouette flashed, disappearing without a trace. At the same time, another voice rang out from afar. "A sword pierces through the night and breaks through the perplexed heart. Only today do I know who I am." Edgar said with lingering fear, "Lunatic, this guy is a complete lunatic." The next moment, Agonizing cries rang out in the hall. All the members of the venomous serpent gang who had been found guilty of great crimes by Fang Xingjian were all killed by the sword cheese, which Fang Xingjian had sent out before he left. Hogan's countenance turned increasingly grim. Lawless. He's simply lawless. That night, the entire venomous serpent gang was uprooted, and those who had relied on the venomous serpent gang to do evil were either killed with a single slash of his sword or had their limbs broken after Fang Xingjian had investigated them one by one. It was a reign of terror. Chapter 132. In Edgar's study, Fang Xingjian sat motionlessly, flipping through a sword arts manual. Edgar was an aristocratic family after all. Although they were not considered to be cursed, they would naturally have collected various nurturing and training martial arts manuals. It just so happened that Fang Xingjian wanted to collect sword arts, and so he started reading. Just as he was reading the manual, the door to the study opened and Edgar's clan head walked in. When he saw Fang Xingjian sitting cross-legged on the study table, his face turned pale and he jumped in fright. Fang Xingjian's unfathomable sword arts had left a deep impression in his heart. He still had the sword wounds that Fang Xingjian had given him. However, Fang Xingjian did not even raise his head, his eyes fixed on a manual as he said, "I've looked into your affairs. There are many messy things that you really don't know about." Indeed, according to Fang Xingjian's investigations, although Edgar was secretly supporting the venomous serpent gang, he was mainly using the venomous serpent gang to amass wealth, build up connections, and also gather some cultivation materials. The venomous serpent gang had done many dark and cruel things in secret, often hiding it from their superiors and subordinates, not letting Edgar know about it. In fact, Edgar was an aristocrat after all. How could he covet the little money from enslaving beggars and forcing women into prostitution? These were just the cruel actions of the venomous serpent gang's upper echelon, all for the sake of satisfying their own pockets. Hearing Fang Xingjian's words, Edgar secretly heaved a sigh of relief. However, he still refused to admit defeat, saying, "Fang Xingjian, you've barged in a cursed city and started a massacre. Even if you're a knight, you can't just let this slide. I've already reported this to the association and the academy. You could just wait to be investigated." This was the advantage of being a knight. If Fang Xingjian did not have the status of knight, he would have long been captured by countless people and surrounded by the city guard's institution soldiers. However, it was different for him as a knight. Other than the Royal Knight Association, no one else in the empire could pursue his crimes. Moreover, at the end of the day, the people he had killed were merely a bunch of gangsters. While this might cause a huge commotion on Earth, in the eyes of those aristocrats and knights in Miracle World, it was just a number. Hearing Edgar's words, Fang Xingjian shook his head. "Although you didn't take the initiative to do evil, you allowed the gang to amass wealth. The reason why the venomous serpent gang has caused so much trouble is still because of you. I won't kill you. Just work for me for the next few days." Edgar was so furious that his face turned red. He had wanted to rebut, but when he thought of Fang Xingjian's abilities and the rumored relationship he had with Governor Devitt, the fury on his face gradually turned into bitterness. His swordsmanship was superb, and he had a powerful background. He could not afford to offend such a person. "What exactly do you want?" "It's nothing." Fang Xingjian closed the manual, and another nurturing technique appeared on his stats window. "I'll be returning to the academy 5 days later. In these 5 days, try your best to gather sword arts manuals and forging materials. Don't repeat the swordsmanship manuals. The key to forging materials is to have a wide variety. Just a little bit of each will do." Hearing this request, Edgar felt that it was a little strange. What sword arts manuals do you want? It doesn't matter if it's high or low, as long as it's sword arts. As he spoke, Fang Xingjian's silhouette had already turned into a faint phantom image, eventually disappearing. "I'll come over at this time, every day. Edgar, don't disappoint me." It was unknown when he had left. However, Edgar let out a sigh of relief, thinking that Fang Xingjian's request was not that high. He would be able to get it done just by sending someone to gather it. On the other hand, Fang Xingjian's silhouette drifted away with the wind, bringing along gusts of wind. In the blink of an eye, he appeared on the rooftop of a building several thousand meters away. Without having to kill Edgar with a single sword attack, Feng Xingjian would not have to face the wrath of the countless aristocrats in Curse City. However, at the same time, just as he came to this conclusion, he noticed that the mental cultivation method on his stats window had stopped as well. Right now, on his stats window, the mental cultivation method had become Universal Sword Dominance Lunisolar, followed by a row of blurry lines. Feng Xingjian thought to himself, the physical body needs to be improved bit by bit through cultivation, but the mental state can be comprehended. But on the other hand, if one uses actions and experiences to strengthen one's heart bit by bit, then one can naturally change one's way of thinking. This is the training after the epiphany. And now, although I've gained an epiphany, I no longer have the pressure from the aristocrats in the city. This pressure is more of a motivation. And now that I've lost this motivation, it means that I've lost the training, causing my mental cultivation method to stagnate. It was like a wealthy man suddenly gaining enlightenment one day, returning to the path of emptiness. This could be considered a change in the mental state. However, there were different levels to it. It was too easy to give up on the mortal world and enter the path of emptiness. However, it was too difficult for other mental states. For example, it was impossible for a person to gain enlightenment one day, possessing the mental state of an emperor who could rule over the world. In order to have the mental state of an emperor, a top-notch character in the mortal world, one had to become an emperor step by step, bearing the weight of the world and looking down on the common people. It was definitely not something that could be achieved by playing emperor games or reading emperor novels or comics, as if they had entered the path of emptiness. It was the same for Feng Xingjian's mental state. It was not something that could be achieved just by saying a few words or thinking about it. He had to do it personally to put it into practice. Only by doing what he had done would he be able to have the kind of mental state he wanted. The higher one's realm was, the more it was so. However, Feng Xingjian knew that it was impossible for him to go back and kill Edgar. Edgar was not evil, and even if he killed him, it would be useless. Instead, he would be killing the innocent, and he would feel uneasy. He could only spend the next few nights in Curse City looking for villains to kill. At the same time, he would go to Edgar's place to collect sword techniques and check on the materials. However, it was already very rare for Curse to have the venomous serpent gang. How could there be so many villains in reality? 5 days later, Feng Xingjian had collected a total of 15 sets of nurturing sword techniques. All of them had been bought by Edgar from the various dojos and schools in the area. 5 days later, in the study, a table of various materials was placed before Feng Xingjian. Most of them were ores, while a small portion were plants, trees, and beast bones. Feng Xingjian casually picked up a small piece of ore, and streams of white light appeared on his palm. The next moment, a thin layer of fog appeared on the surface of the ore, and under Feng Xingjian's expectant gaze, the ore started to crack and peel off. Shaking his head, he threw the ore away and picked up another piece of metal. Feng Xingjian wanted to see if there were any materials that could withstand his effulgence weapon, so that he could follow the records on the Ether Divine Art and rely on smelting materials to speed up the formation of the effulgence weapon. However, for the past 5 days, he had tried many of the materials that Edgar had brought, but none of them were successful. It was only when he saw this metal particle that a hint of astonishment suddenly appeared on Feng Xingjian's face. The metal particle continued to tremble slightly, and then started to emit high temperatures. Chapter 133. Feng Xingjian studied the metal particle for a few hours and discovered that this thing seemed to be able to convert kinetic energy into heat energy. Moreover, there was only an extremely small amount of energy depletion. It could be said to be an extremely perfect metal material. Feng Xingjian had seen many unique forging materials from Miracle World over the past few days. There were all sorts of jelly-like metals, metals that could change shape according to one's will, steel bars that could absorb sunlight to grow, and so on. However, This was the first time he had seen something that was so amazing and suitable for his effulgence weapon. Fang Xingjian looked at Edgar and asked, "What is this?" Edgar identified it and said, "This is Seism steel. This material isn't considered very sturdy, but it can defend against all sorts of impacts and blunt attacks. It's considered a pretty good material. However, this thing is very rare." He had interacted with Fang Xingjian for the past few days and realized that when they did not talk about killing and evading evil, Fang Xingjian was still easier to communicate with. Thus, they had slowly become familiar with each other. He threw a glance at Fang Xingjian and asked, "You want this thing?" Fang Xingjian nodded. "What's the price for this?" "It's not a problem of price." Edgar shook his head and said, "The Garcia people have attacked, and the Western garrison has placed a radius of several hundred li under martial law. Things like Seism steel have all been kept in the army. The mine that produces Seism steel has also been guarded, and ordinary people are not allowed to enter. If you want it now, you'll have to think of ways to get it from the army. Otherwise, you'll have to pass through the battlefield and look for it in the mine." Fang Xingjian frowned. This Seism steel was too suitable to be the smelting material for his effulgence weapon. Once there was a sufficient amount, he had the confidence to form the effulgence weapon within a day. "There's nothing left in Cursed." Edgar shook his head. "It's already a coincidence that I was able to get this. If you want to look for it, other than the mine and the army, there's no other way." Fang Xingjian nodded, picked up the Seism steel, and walked out of the door. Edgar was stunned and said, "You're leaving?" Fang Xingjian did not reply. He had already achieved most of his goals in coming to Cursed. Mental cultivation methods could indeed be cultivated consciously. He had even established the direction of his own mental cultivation method, his own heart, and his own Tao. The collection of sword techniques had also been completed. As long as he could train these sword techniques to the maximum level, it would be enough for his supreme sword intent to level up. As for his effulgence weapon, he had already found a direction. He needed to gather Seism steel to quickly refine his effulgence weapon. Seeing Fang Xingjian's back as he left, Edgar was stunned for a moment. In the end, he could not help but say, "Young man, you are talented and have a bright future ahead of you. Why do you have to go against those scum at the bottom of society? There's so much darkness in this world. Can you clear it?" Fang Xingjian did not look back. As he walked, he said, "But at least I have a heart that wants to sweep him clean." Edgar's body shook, and he did not speak for a long time. It was not until Fang Xingjian's figure completely disappeared that he muttered to himself, "What a strong killing intent." With Fang Xingjian's speed, it was really too fast for him to return to the academy. However, the moment he returned, he saw a figure standing at the entrance of his villa. Fang Xingjian stopped, looked at the figure in front of him, and said, "Master." Huang Lin turned, his expression unreadable as he asked, "You've killed a lot of people in Cursed?" Fang Xingjian looked at Huang Lin and said, "Yes." "Why did you kill them?" Huang Lin asked. Fang Xingjian replied, "To kill those who deserve to be killed, to appease my heart." Huang Lin sighed. "What do you mean by those who deserve to be killed?" "In this world, the weak are prey to the strong, and the strong survive. Who hasn't done anything wrong? It's fine if you kill them, because they're just ordinary people. But have you ever thought that if they were knights, conferred knights, or divine-level experts, would you still have to kill them?" Fang Xingjian replied without hesitation, "Of course I'll kill them one by one." Huang Lin's brows furrowed even more. "If you do things like this, your future will only get narrower and narrower. No one will like companions like you. Regardless of whether it's the commoners, aristocrats, or the various members of the empire's upper echelon, what if they all become your enemies? If I do something bad, even if it's a great sin, even if I die 10,000 times, I won't be able to atone for it. Will you still kill me?" Fang Xingjian frowned and fell silent for a moment. He had thought of lying, of deceiving others, of coming up with all sorts of excuses. However, as he continued to think, the thoughts in his mind became increasingly clearer and more resolute. Faced with Huang Lin's gaze, which was like a sharp sword, he said calmly, I'll definitely kill them. Before Fang Xingjian could finish his words, a great force from the mountains and seas came gushing toward him. With a boom, Fang Xingjian was sent flying and smashed into the villa, spurting out a large mouthful of blood. This is teacher. Is this the true power of a conferred knight? Fang Xingjian got up slowly. To think that even I couldn't react to the speed at which he attacked at his full power. At the next moment, countless sword light descended from the sky like a rainstorm, as if wanting to encompass Fang Xingjian completely. Fang Xingjian's countenance changed, and he drew his long sword, turning it into a tornado of sword cheese that swept out toward the sword light. Crisp clanging sounds rang out incessantly, and with each sword attack that Fang Xingjian received, a wound would appear on his body. In the blink of an eye, a large amount of blood stains were left on his body. Huang Lin, who had gone all out, displayed the true power of a conferred knight without holding anything back before Fang Xingjian. Many sword moves came gushing down like a great river, so fast that Fang Xingjian could only see blurry shadows. His great strength caused his bones and muscles to creak with each move he received. With a bang, the long sword shattered, and Fang Xingjian let out a stifled snort, retreating another 7 steps before he managed to steady himself. Lifting his head, he saw that the entire area of the villa had been encompassed by over 10,000 streams of sword force. It was Huang Lin's killing technique, void cleaving longsword. He had condensed the sword force in the air, forming a strange scene like a laser prison pillar. Huang Lin's voice rang out from afar. Rebellious disciple, you don't have to participate in the actual combat training this time around. I've stored enough food and drinks in the villa. You can just stay here and reflect on yourself. Fang Xingjian narrowed his eyes and sat cross-legged on the ground. His mind was still filled with Huang Lin's sword move, which was like a great river. However, it was too fast, and he could not see it clearly at all, let alone find its flaws or learn it. The current me is still not a match for a conferred knight. The headmaster looked at the fatigued Huang Lin and sighed. Why do you have to be like this? Huang Lin smiled and said, I can't let him end up like me. The actual combat training this time around is too dangerous. It's better for this old man to bear the burden alone. The headmaster shook his head. Why do sword practitioners like you all have such bad tempers? If one's heart is not straight, their sword will not be straight. Huang Lin smiled and said, They don't have the spirit to press forward with an indomitable spirit and die 100 times without regrets. They only care about themselves and are unwilling to do anything for this world. No matter how high their sword arts are, they're still trash and useless. They're not fit to be that person's subordinate. Although this lad's mental cultivation method is a little extreme, he still has something of his own. With the determination to press forward with an indomitable spirit, there'll be more hope for him to attain heaven's perception and step into the second transition. Chapter 134. Over the next few days, most of the knights in the academy left with the army. In the blink of an eye, the entire Royal Academy had become extremely quiet. Fang Xingjian sat cross-legged on the ground, cultivating his sword arts while looking at the mental cultivation method on his stats window. Universal Sword Dominance Lunisolar. Ever since he had not backed down when faced with Huang Lin's questioning, his mental cultivation method had become a little clearer. It was just that he still lacked an opportunity to complete it. For the past few days, he had been locked up here by Huang Lin. Therefore, he decided to focus on cultivating his sword arts, planning to complete his unparalleled sword intent first. Over the past few days, he had reached the maximum level for another 3 sword techniques, bringing his total to 78 sword techniques at the maximum level. Other than that, he had also been tempering his attributes and cultivating his waves nonstop. He checked the basement of the villa. There was indeed a lot of dry rations and preserved ferocious beasts, enough for him to eat and drink for a long time. As for the sword force that Huang Lin had left behind, he had also tried it out. Even if he wanted to break it, it would not be easy. After a few days, Fang Xingjian lifted his head and let out a sigh. The last day of the year had passed. Fang Xingjian only had 4 years left to the 5-year promise, and he had reached the age of 17. Looking up into the sky, Fang Xingjian's expression was calm, but there seemed to be flames burning in his eyes. Demonic City. Just then, a series of noises came from afar in the academy. Fang Xingjian frowned and looked into the distance, only to discover that the noises were getting closer and closer. Many people seemed to have come out. Although almost all the knights in the academy had left, many of the servants, cooks, and maids were still around. As the noises got closer, Fang Xingjian saw a tanned young man in his 20s dashing toward him. That young man's skin was dark and cracked. It was obvious that he had been exposed to the sun for a long period of time. Both his hands and feet were covered in calluses, and he must have done a lot of physical labor. The moment he walked up to Fang Xingjian, he knelt down on the ground, separated by the sword force that Huang Lin had left behind. He started to cow down nonstop, knocking his head against the ground, producing continuous banging sounds. In the blink of an eye, his head was already covered in blood. Fang Xingjian looked at him coldly. He did not have any sympathy or mercy. He watched the young man kowtow more than 10 times and said to him with his head covered in blood, "Lord Fang Xingjian, I'm Valilon from Harvest Fishing Village." Fang Xingjian looked at his pupils, his face filled with pain and resentment, and his mind slowly began to recall. The Harvest Fishing Village was the fishing village that had taken him in when he had just arrived in Miracle World. Relying on his mental cultivation method to train his superb memory, he gradually matched the image of a shy young man in his mind with the young man before him. He said slowly, "What happened? The old man is dead. Everyone in the village is dead." Valilon sprawled on the ground and started crying bitterly. The guards and servants who had caught up from behind also stopped in their tracks, exchanging glances as they looked at this scene. "You guys can leave." Fang Xingjian waved most of the servants away and said slowly, "Who did it?" "It's Garcia's great warriors." That person cried out, "Other than me, everyone else in the village is dead." After they came ashore, they killed everyone they saw, not even sparing the children and women. Garcia's great warriors were the local knights. It was how the people of Garcia addressed those who had gone through the first transition with extraordinary powers. Hearing the young man's tearful complaints, Fang Xingjian said, "Do you know who did it in Garcia?" His gaze was like a sharp sword, cutting through the air and reflecting into the young man's eyes. "Don't lie to me. Otherwise, I'll definitely kill you with my sword." That young man's body shivered and a chill gushed forth. However, he was not lying, so he said without hesitation, "It's a black devil by the name of Mamukia. While I was hiding, I heard those black devils addressing their leader as such." The servant who had not left frowned and said, "Mamukia, in Garcia's language, means the most courageous hunter. This time around, Garcia has led 3 destined warriors, corresponding to confer knights. Only one of them can be called Mamukia. Mamukia, Garcia's second transition destined warrior. Of course, Garcia did not have a complete legacy like the empires. Most of them had only succeeded in their second transition through luck and elimination. They did not have the empire's second transition legacy, which was the most important 10 heavenly barriers. Each barrier allowed them to break through one level, changing their life's intrinsic qualities bit by bit, coming into contact with ether particles deeply, and creating destructive prowess that was like a natural disaster. Therefore, the destined warriors were all at level 20 and had no way of leveling up. However, even so, they were not people that ordinary first transition knights could defeat. Fang Xingjian looked at the young man and asked, "You want me to help you take revenge?" The servant at the side said in astonishment, "Sir, you mustn't. This time around, Garcia has brought a total of 300 great warriors. This Mamukia is Garcia's destined warrior who is comparable to our confer knights. His abilities are not to be underestimated." Hearing the servant's words, the young man hesitated as well. Previously, he had only been filled with hatred and wanted to seek revenge. How could he be clear about the current battle situation and Mamukia's abilities? Seeing his hesitation, Fang Xingjian smiled. However, Killing intent flashed wildly in his eyes, and his fury was blazing like a volcano erupting. With a wave of one hand, a longsword landed in his hand. With another hand, he pulled out the silver dragon from his waist. He thought to himself, "That's good too. I'd originally wanted to improve my sword intent or waves by another level before going out to participate in the battle to level up, striving to reach first transition level 19 before the regional selection half a year later." However, right now, Fang Xingjian only felt that his mental cultivation method was stirring, and an extremely violent power was moving around in his consciousness. He understood that if he could withstand the endless pressure and kill Mimukya, he would definitely be able to clear his mind and achieve great success in his mental cultivation method. If he could not even withstand this bit of pressure, then there would be no need to talk about clearing the world. It would be extremely difficult for his mental cultivation method to improve. This was the path he had chosen. It was an extremely narrow and difficult path. However, Fang Xingjian did not regret it in the slightest. Wait in the academy. I'll definitely bring back Mimukya's head and avenge your entire village. The next moment, strong gales brought up hundreds of afterimages, and the servant and the young man were all sent flying. The silver dragon in Fang Xingjian's hand was like many silver thunderbolts, slashing towards the sword force left behind by Huang Lin. If it was Fang Xingjian's own sword cheese and long sword, then it would be very difficult for him to slash through these sword forces and escape. However, he was now using the supreme Mistwind sword with one hand to increase his speed, while the other held the silver dragon, relying on the sharpness of a level 7 Empire's divine weapon to slash continuously. That sword force had only been casually performed by Huang Lin. It was already not easy for him to be able to maintain it for such a long time and even defend against the steel longsword. However, how could it be possible for him to remain unscathed from the continuous attacks of a level 7 Empire's divine weapon like the silver dragon? Within about a minute, countless slashes at the speed of sound were slashed down, and crackling sounds of explosions rang out incessantly. When the smoke dissipated, a black shadow darted out. Then whistling sounds rang out continuously, and over 100 steel swords rose up from within the villa, all of them shooting out together with the black shadow, as if they were riding on their swords. They pierced through the air and let out swishing sounds. As Fang Xingjian disappeared, a frenzied howl rang out, entering everyone's ears. Slash, slash, slash. Slash, till the noble spirit lasts forever. Slash, 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 slash. Slash, till the heavens and earth are overturned. Chapter 135. Right now, the western coast of the Empire's Great Western region had turned into a battlefield due to Garcia's 300 great warriors wreaking havoc. These 300 Garcia's great warriors were split into countless small teams of 3 to 5 people. They were scattered throughout the Great Western continent, burning, killing, looting, and creating destruction. Due to Garcia's martial arts legacy, the individual abilities of these Garcia's great warriors could not be compared to the Empire's knights. However, it was almost unprecedented for them to send out so many people to engage in a large-scale battle. They actually managed to suppress more than 100 people from the Western Garrison Army. That was why the Royal School had sent reinforcements. In fact, it was not just Cursed Royal Academy. The other 2 Royal Academies from other regions had also sent out their own knights. After all the Royal Academies were schools for reserve soldiers. Once they were mobilized, the Empire's terrifying battle potential was instantly displayed. However, the Empire wouldn't be able to stop Garcia in a short period of time if he were to split into tens of teams of knights and wreak havoc everywhere. However, with the support of so many knights and conferred knights, most of the towns were no longer in danger. The ones that were in danger were those towns that did not have sufficient defenses. After all, the entire empire had 100,000 official knights and 5,000 conferred knights. Right now, the battle between the Western Garrison, a local army, was just a small matter to the entire empire. However, to many of the commoners at the lower levels, it was a complete disaster. Fang Xingjian left the academy and first ran in the direction of the fishing village. All he saw was ruins. He then dared to head to the nearby villages and saw over 10 of them that had been burnt to a crisp. Finally, he found some living people. After ascertaining that Mamukia had indeed led his men to do this, he started to head west at a rapid speed. His speed was fast to begin with. Even if he couldn't run at full speed because of the long journey, his speed was almost the same as a car on the highway. He was supported by streams of sword cheese all over his body. With a light leap, he would be able to fly out several tens of meters. Each time his sword cheese were depleted, he would casually slash out, and another over 10 streams of sword cheese would be created. At the same time, there were hundreds of iron swords following behind him, making soft whooshing sounds. His whole body was like a sharp arrow, shuttling through the forest, startling countless birds. Along the way, he ate dry rations when he was hungry, looked for water when he was thirsty, and rested for 10 minutes every 2 hours to ensure that his stamina was at its peak. Just like that, he moved forward quickly without encountering any battles along the way. The next morning, they had already crossed the mountains and arrived at a basin. Roar, roar, roar. As Fang Xingjian traversed through the forest, a few wolf shadows suddenly appeared behind him. Each of them was at least 4 to 5 meters long. A year ago, when Fang Xingjian encountered these ferocious beasts, he could only run away. But now, when he encountered these huge wolves, he could only smile. While he was in midair, he suddenly twisted his upper body, turned around, and swept his long sword horizontally. An extremely sharp white sword cheese streaked across a distance of over 100 meters like a laser. The next moment, the giant wolf was dismembered and dozens of trees collapsed. Just these few giant wolves provided Fang Xingjian with 0.5% EXP, and he was currently at level 10 with 11.3% EXP. He had killed most of them in the past day. This was also his first time leveling up by killing monsters. As for the members of the venomous serpent gang, the experience they had given him was not even as much as the experience he had gained from practicing a set of sword techniques. As expected, relying on hunting ferocious beasts to level up really isn't fast. The problem is that it takes too long to find them. I wonder how much experience I'll get if I were to kill a knight. Fang Xingjian landed lightly before the wolf's corpse. Looking at the pile of ferocious beast's meat, he had already decided to use it as dinner. Just then, his ears twitched slightly and he heard cries. Turning his head, he could see that from the back of the mountain range in the distance, there would occasionally be streams of black smoke rising into the sky. Fang Xingjian's eyes narrowed slightly. A strong gust of wind blew, and in the next moment, he disappeared with half of the wolf's corpse. In the village where about a few hundred people lived, there were still a few houses that were burning, while most of the houses had already been turned into ashes. Over 10 elderly people and children were kneeling at the entrance of the village, crying loudly. A strong gust of wind blew, and Fang Xingjian appeared before them. Simultaneously, soft trembling sounds rang out as over 100 longswords were stabbed into the ground. A young boy in his teens shouted out loudly, "You're a knight?" Fang Xingjian ignored him and took a closer look at the scene. When he saw a few corpses whose organs had been cut open, he could not help but frown. He asked, "Did the Garcia people do this? They're not humans. They're beasts." The crowd immediately surged up. Over 10 elderly people and children knelt before Fang Xingjian, crying and complaining. Early this morning, for Garcia's great warriors had charged into the village and killed everyone they saw, regardless of whether they were men or women. They killed indiscriminately, raped, and burned everything down. Fang Xingjian walked up to one of the corpses and discovered that it was a pregnant woman whose child had been dug out while she was still alive. These Garcia people were even more ignorant than the people from the Empire. They seemed to still be in a tribal state, and their great warriors who invaded the outside world were extremely cruel. He asked, "How long have they been gone?" "Over an hour," the boy said. "Sir, please avenge us." The boy's skin was very tanned, and despite his young age, His hands were already filled with calluses. His eyes were still bloodshot, filled with terror, and vengeance. Fang Xingjian nodded and asked, "Which one of you knows the way?" "Me," the boy said. "I've been hunting with my father in the vicinity. I know all the places around here." Fang Xingjian put down half of the wolf's corpse and said casually, "Help me roast this meat. I'll be right back." The next moment, he did not bring the metal swords with him. Instead, he grabbed the boy and disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a group of people, old and young, looking at each other in dismay, not knowing what to do. The boy, who was grabbed by Fang Xingjian, let out a series of agonizing cries. By the time Fang Xingjian came to a stop, he realized that they had reached a mountain outside the village. Where did they go? The boy looked at the surroundings, then pointed to the northwest and said loudly, "There, they've gone in the direction of Goat Ravine." The next moment, the scenery in the surroundings changed continuously, flashing like a fleeting view of flowers. However, the boy endured the discomfort all over his body and did not let out any agonizing cries. However, his physical attributes were too weak after all. Fang Xingjian had to stop every once in a while to let the boy rest and get his bearings. After chasing for over half an hour, Fang Xingjian put the boy down. The boy could not even stand steadily. He felt dizzy and fell to the ground, saying intermittently, I'm fine. I can still hold it in," Fang Xingjian said calmly. "We've already caught up." He glanced at the boy and said, "Wait here." The next second, Fang Xingjian's body brought along a series of afterimages as he dashed out. Chapter 136. For Garcia's great warriors walked in the forest, each of them carrying a bag the size of a human on their backs. Despite this, they were still running and leaping on the tree branches at high speed, as relaxed and swift as the monkeys in the mountains. They displayed great strength, excellent balance, and great stamina. The items in the bags were naturally what they had snatched during the war. As he walked, he was speaking in Garcia's language in a gibberish. "Quick, quick, quick! It's all your fault. We're going to be late. Ha ha ha! When you were playing with that woman, you didn't mention anything about being late." The four of them teased each other as they walked, occasionally letting out loud laughter. They did not look like soldiers at all. This was also the unique characteristic of Garcia's great warriors. They were originally from a tribal civilization, and only a small number of them had grasped extraordinary powers. It was impossible to expect them to have strict military discipline. Just as they were hurrying along, the black man in front suddenly stopped in his tracks. His whole body fell down from the tree. At the same time, his head flew up into the sky, and blood sprayed out like a fountain. It was only then that Fang Xingjian, who was encompassed by up to 100 streams of sword cheese, slowly descended and appeared before them. "Damn it, Bemilio, be careful." Being suddenly attacked, the three of them instantly spread out, looking furiously at Fang Xingjian, who had chopped off their comrade's head with a single sword. One of them said in an awkward and strange common language, "Sing Coda's night? Hee, you bunch of lambs dare to chase after us? I'll eat you up to take revenge for our comrade." Fang Xingjian did not look at them. He only looked at the sword in his hand, a hint of coldness in his eyes. How weak. Even those experienced instructors in the academy who were level 19 were not his match, let alone these Garcia barbarians. Fang Xingjian had read up on them when he was in the academy. These barbarians did not know martial arts. They used the most primitive muscle training to squeeze out the potential of their bodies to train their 5 attributes. They also comprehended supernatural powers through sexual intercourse with various ferocious beasts, devouring their dead relatives and eating dead mutated babies. Now that he had tested his sword, the other party's strength was indeed pitifully weak. It was almost the same as those knights who had changed their class a year or 2 ago. None of them had attributes above 70 points. Fang Xingjian did not reply at all. Instead, he disappeared once again along with over 100 streams of sword cheese. Roar! The 3 Garcia's warriors bellowed out in unison, and signs of beastification such as fur, beast ears, and sharp claws appeared on their bodies. Their bodies swelled up abruptly. Beastification was an ability that the Garcia people had obtained after having sex with wild beasts countless times and devouring each other. This ability was extremely powerful and could instantly increase a person's attributes. However, changing one's physique was something that consumed one's chi and blood. It was equivalent to harming oneself first before harming others. Using it too much would reduce one's lifespan. Many of Garcia's great warriors had recklessly abused their beast transformation abilities and would usually die at the age of 40. However, this race was cruel, bloodthirsty, and belligerent. Most of the warriors could not even live past the age of 30, so they would not care about what would happen in the future. However, this time around, they had not even swelled up to half of their original size after their beastification. Under the encompassing sword light, one of them had blood splattering all over the place. When one was beastifying, the blood glow in their organs would be circulating intensely, yet they had received such an attack. How fatal was this? It was as if his entire body had been pierced by over 100 swords. Fresh blood spurted out, and he died in an instant, falling onto the ground. The other two only had the time to throw out a punch before their limbs were severed by the 3 feet long sword light, falling into a pool of blood. Although these 4 great warriors were very weak to Fang Xingjian, they were already considered elites in Garcia. There were 19 great warriors who had hunted countless wild beasts and killed thousands of people. Fang Xingjian looked at his stats window. After consecutively killing these 2 level 19 great warriors, Fang Xingjian had leveled up by 1 level, reaching level 11 with 4% experience and an increase of 11 points in his agility attribute. As expected, killing knights who were of a higher level than him would give him a lot of experience. This level had allowed Fang Xingjian's agility to break through to 106, and his abilities had once again increased by leaps and bounds. As expected, killing people and monsters is the best way to level up. If I can level up a few more times, I might even be able to defeat a conferred knight. The corners of Fang Xingjian's lips curled up slightly as he looked at the 2 black men who had their limbs severed and were lying on the ground. He said, "Tell me, where is Mamukia?" When a young boy saw that Fang Xingjian had disappeared without a trace in an instant, he immediately felt uneasy. Although Fang Xingjian appeared to be very powerful, he had seen with his own eyes how those 4 monsters from Garcia had charged into the village, wreaking havoc everywhere as if they were invincible. Weapons, swords, and bows had been unable to penetrate their skin, water and fire had been unable to harm their bodies, and they had been able to collapse houses with just a casual punch. The more the young boy thought about it, the more worried he became. He felt that Fang Xingjian had been too rash in chasing after the 4 of them alone. This is troublesome. He was too rash. How could he have allowed him to charge forward alone? He should have waited for his teammates to arrive before attacking together. 1 against 4, just as the young boy was getting more and more worried, scared, and nervous, Fang Xingjian had already walked forward with the heads of the 4 black men hanging on his waist. After killing another 2 black men, his stats window was now at level 12, 2%. As for the 4 black men's corpses, although they were not comparable to knights, they could still be used to make the lowest level inferior remains divine weapons. Therefore, Fang Xingjian had naturally buried all of them and marked them. His attributes had once again received the job advancement from the Wind Shadow Sword Divinity, becoming Name Fang Xingjian, age 17, occupation Wind Shadow, sword divinity level 12, strength 56, plus 5 agility, 112 plus 5 reaction, 55 endurance, 49 flexibility, 51. The attributes above come into effect once the Sonido Sword Zephyr Waves is activated. Due to perfect muscles, plus 5 in strength and agility, 10% of the endurance attribute. Nurturing sword techniques, 94 sets training sword techniques, 12 sets supreme, Mistwind sword level 30 radiant light, sword technique level 6 specialties, genius swordsmanship, elementary survival instinct, internal healing, internal training, sword specialist, high agility motion vision, high reflexes, Perfect muscles, elementary berserkness, supreme sword intent, 79 out of 100, potential 11,000 point increase, /day waves. Level 5 Sonido sword, Zephyr waves mental cultivation, method, level 3 universal sword dominance lunisolar with a total of 112 points in agility. The single sword world subjugation had also increased his movement and attack speed by 224%. Right now, Fang Xingjian's abilities had far surpassed those senior knights, and he was progressing in an increasingly unfathomable direction. Looking at the sudden appearance of Fang Xingjian and the 4 heads hanging on his waist, the young boy's mind went blank. The next moment, he was already kneeling on the ground, kowtowing incessantly toward Fang Xingjian. As he kowtowed, hot tears flowed uncontrollably from his eyes. "Let me ask you a question. How do I get to Kremlin Bay?" The young boy was stunned for a moment. He took in a deep breath before he started to give Fang Xingjian directions. After hearing that, Fang Xingjian nodded and grabbed the other party's body. With a single leap, he was like a huge bird, flying over a distance of over 100 meters in the air. It was only then that he landed on the ground and flew out with another leap. This time around, there was no need for the boy to give directions. Although Fang Xingjian had slowed down in order not to kill him, he still managed to return to the village after about 10 minutes or so. At this moment, the people in the village were still sorting out the corpses, looking at Fang Xingjian in a daze. Fang Xingjian casually tossed the 4 heads onto the ground, and the over 10 villagers immediately knelt down. "Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Papa, Mama, we've avenged you." Fang Xingjian could not be bothered to see the group of people sobbing. He walked to the side of the wolf's corpse, only to discover that the other party had not cooked any meat. An elderly stood up, trembling, and said, "Sir, please wait a moment. We'll wash the pot, light the fire, and cook the meat for you." "Forget it." Fang Xingjian shook his head. He had just received news from the 2 Garcia great warriors that all of the Garcia people had started to retreat, and Mamukia was about to reach the beach. How could he have any time to waste? However, for a knight like him, it would not be good for his body if he did not eat any meat or ferocious beasts. After all, they needed energy to maintain their stamina. Therefore, Fang Xingjian casually slashed out with his sword fingers, slicing off a piece of meat the size of a human's head. Fang Xingjian took big bites out of it, his teeth as sharp as blades. With a few bites, he swallowed the piece of meat and finished it. The elderly at the side pleaded, "Sir, the flames of war are raging everywhere. There are Garcia's black devils everywhere. Can you bring us out? I beg of you." Saying that, the others also knelt down, pleading with Fang Xingjian to protect them and bring them to a safe place to seek refuge. However, Fang Xingjian threw them a cold glance, not bothering with them. He wanted to sweep through the world and slay external devils. However, he had no interest in taking care of the weak or protecting the kind. He only wanted to slay evil and not promote good. It was just like how he had slaughtered the triads and cursed, but he would not care about what would happen to the good people in the future. However, if there were people who continued to commit evil, he would just kill them again. Throwing a glance at the crowd, he said casually, "Not interested. You guys can just find a place to hide. They won't search so thoroughly." Then, with a swing of his long sword, he dashed out with over 100 metal swords, leaving behind a series of whistling sounds that reverberated in the village. Everyone looked at the departing Fang Xingjian, feeling that he was extremely heroic and valiant, just like a hero from the legends. However, thinking of how they would have to face the dangers alone after losing his protection, they felt that it would be extremely difficult, and they could not raise their spirits. Chapter 137. With a bang, a bug was trampled to death by a foot that descended from the sky. Kaunitz, dressed in a red robe and with faint red patterns on his head, frowned as he looked at the large number of broken trees. The scorching forest seemed to remind Kaunitz of the years he had spent cultivating in the volcano. His expression was slightly distorted, as if there was an evil gleam in his eyes. Since young, Kaunitz had been nurtured as a genius in the Treja family. It was also because of this that he had received countless sword arts training, but had no time to ponder over politics, business, management, or interpersonal relationships. He had thought that there was no need for him to learn these things. As long as he had a sword in his hand, he had the confidence to slash everything before him into two. Since young, he had always been number one in sword arts. At home, in the clan, in the academy, in Cursed, there had never been anyone who could surpass his talent in sword arts. He did not think that there was anyone in the world who could surpass him. Number one sword in the world. When this thought had appeared in his mind, his blood had once boiled and burned through his entire body, until he met Feng Xingjian. At the thought of Feng Xingjian, his huge heart, which had been encompassed by the dragon's blood, pounded violently a few more times. It was that Feng Xingjian who had made him feel the taste of failure for the first time. When he discovered that Feng Xingjian had transitioned into a windstorm sword hero, and that he was unable to catch up to him no matter what he did, endless terror descended upon him. Unable to surpass Feng Xingjian, and far from being able to match up to him in terms of talent, then what was the point of me? What was the point of me cultivating for so many years? Was the meaning of my existence to be trampled under his feet, to look up to him for the rest of my life? Why? Why must there be such a genius in the world? Why must there be such a beast in the world? Jealousy, hatred, and fury turned into endless flames, burning his body in the volcano together with the divine flames of the earth's core. The boundless evil power twisted his mind and tortured him, and it would also torture everyone he met. The killing techniques of the ancient path of hell emphasized that if one did not enter hell themselves, how could one make the opponent do so? Right now, under the scorching effects of both the heart fire and the earth fire, Kaunitz had turned into a demon from hell. His only target was Feng Xingjian. Beside him, Rebecca squatted down and looked at the cut on the tree trunk, as well as the wolf carcass on the ground. She narrowed her eyes and said, "This little beast runs really fast." On the other side, Cynthia frowned and said, "I'm just afraid that he'll level up after killing the ferocious beasts and black devils along the way. That would be even more troublesome. We have to find him quickly." Kaunitz let out a cold laugh and said, "It's useless even if he were to level up. At level 1, a windstorm sword hero would only have 8 points in agility. No matter how much he levels up, he would only have 150 to 160 points in agility. He might be powerful, but the methods we've prepared are sufficient to deal with him." However, he did not know that Feng Xingjian's job was not a windstorm sword hero, but a level 1 wind shadow sword divinity with 11 points in agility. He also had the growth potential specialty single sword world subjugation. Each point in agility would increase his movement and attack speed by 2%. Rebecca stood up, looked at the mountain range in the distance, and said, "He went there." With a loud bang, the group of people cut through streams of air currents, flying toward the mountain range in the distance. Kaunitz and the others stepped into the village, and the red print on his forehead faintly formed a ball of red flames. That was the sign of the infernal, indestructible physique being mastered. Throwing a casual glance at the devastated village, Kaunitz turned his head and saw over 10 people of all ages walking over. Seeing their attire, the white-haired old man in the lead asked, "Are you all knights?" He said agitatedly, "You guys are also here to kill black devils? One of your comrades, who is also a knight, has already left after killing 4 black devils." With that, the villagers took out the food they had just prepared, wanting to offer it to Kaunitz and the others. Be it the elderly or the children, all of them wore sincere smiles, clearly welcoming the knights before them. However, Kaunitz and the others only looked at them coldly. No one took the food, nor did they speak. Kaunitz glanced at the chicken, duck, and fish in their hands. Looking at the food, which was still covered in mud, dust, and charred marks, a hint of disgust and disdain flashed in his eyes. An uneasy feeling spread out in everyone's hearts. Kaunitz slowly walked up to a little girl, smiled, and squatted down. He patted the little girl's head and asked, "Hello, Was the knight who passed by earlier a man who brought a lot of sword with him? When he walked, several tins of swords flew around behind him. The little girl nodded seriously. That's right. Sir Knight ran very fast, and those swords flew away with a swoosh. Countess's face broke into an evil smile, and he continued to ask in a gentle voice, Then do you know where he went? Just then, the little boy who had given Fong Xinjiang directions slapped away Countess's hand, which was touching the little girl's. He stood in front of the little girl and said, How do we know if you guys are his comrades or not? And if you guys are, why are you asking where he went? Don't you guys know? Countess stroked his chin, giving it some thought as he looked at the few people before him. Suddenly, he smiled. I had wanted to make up a lie to you guys. But after some thought, I realized that you commoners don't have the right to be lied to by me. Countess stood up slowly and said coldly, Which direction did that be asterisk star go in? Everyone present immediately tensed up. The white-bearded old man walked over, trembling, and said, Sir, that knight left just like that. We really don't know where he went. With a puff, Countess blew on his fingers, and that old man fell down with a bloody hole in his head. His actions and appearance were as easy as killing a sheep or a cow. Rebecca and the others stood behind him, not paying any attention to what was happening in front of them. This was Miracle World. In this age that was even darker than the Middle Ages, these commoners in the mountain villages were no better than cows and sheep in the eyes of aristocrats like Countess. I'll kill a person every time I ask. Countess smiled and said, Where did that be asterisk starred go? With a puff, another person fell down. Someone cried out in fear, wanting to escape. No. Someone knelt down. Please, sir, please spare us. We really don't know anything. Amidst the chaos, the young boy clenched his fists tightly, and his pupils contracted and dilated incessantly. It was as if he had entered a state of contradiction. Countess's gaze landed on him, and after a slight smile, he appeared behind the boy. He patted the boy on the shoulder and said softly into the boy's ears, You seem to know something. The boy's body trembled fiercely as he said, I don't know anything. However, how could a boy in his teens disguise hide from Countess, and the first prince in Countess's body? He patted the boy on the shoulder, and with a puff, another old lady fell to the ground. The boy's body trembled, and he broke out in cold sweat. Agonizing cries rang out incessantly in his ears, and Countess's voice, which was like a demon's low growl, rang out next to him once again. The person behind you. Is that your younger sister? No. Countess grabbed the boy's younger sister, and like a phantom, his red silhouette suddenly appeared 10 meters away. Looking at the boy's anxious expression, Countess grinned and said, I'll ask you one last time. He placed his palm gently on the little girl's head and asked, Where did he go? After all, the boy was only a child in his teens. After going through such a great change and facing such pressure, how could he possibly withstand it? He immediately knelt down and said with great difficulty, He went to Kremlin Bay. Countess smiled. You're smart. You didn't lie to me. At the next moment, the girl in his arms turned into flames, and in less than a second, she was burned into ashes. Ah! The boy cried out loudly, and his eyes opened wide. The blood vessels on his neck popped up, and he dashed toward Countess. However, at the next moment, he was set ablaze by a spark, and in the blink of an eye, there was only ashes left. The massacre had started and ended in an instant. Countess nodded. Their secret operation this time around had gone against the Empire's rules, so how could they not get rid of them? Moreover, it was convenient for them to get rid of Garcia's black ghost. Rebecca said eerily, That little be asterisk starred has indeed gone to chase after Mukia. Countess, the people you prepared have followed the main group there, right? Of course. Countess's face revealed a hint of savagery. This time around, it's hard for him to escape. Putting aside the fact that he's just a windstorm sword hero who has only completed his job transition 3 months ago, even if he had advanced to first transition level 19, he'd still be dead meat. The first prince in his body let out a cold snort, dissatisfied. Countess immediately reacted, saying in his heart, Of course, he won't really die. He'll only truly submit to you after receiving our hospitality. He'll become your most loyal hound, your most obedient sword. I guarantee it. Chapter 138. Countless black lines moved about in the sky, piercing to and fro, releasing swoosh, 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 swoosh sounds. It was as if a bomber plane was cruising around. A few Garcia's great warriors with black skin and eyes stared hatefully at the metal swords that were shuttling back and forth in the sky. One of them said furiously, "Damn it, where on earth did this monster come from? He's only a first transition knight, but he already has a battle prowess close to that of a conferred knight." Another person said, "We can't go on like this. We've already lost 7 of our men. If this goes on, we'll all be wiped out before we even encounter the other teams." He killed 7 of our men and was injured as well. He's been cursed by Munya and is definitely not having a good time now. Moreover, we've already destroyed a large number of those long swords flying in the sky. There's still over 20 of them left. If we go all out, we'll definitely be able to kill him. What's there to kill? Let's retreat first and deal with him after we find the other teams. Retreat? Are you still Garcia's brave warrior? We've lost 7 of our brothers, and you want to retreat now? You idiot, the other party's speed is so fast. How can we possibly escape? Faced with an expert like Fang Xingjian who had unrivaled speed, if they were unable to defeat him, they were destined to die. It would be impossible for them to escape. Just as the 3 of them were debating on whether to retreat or fight to the death, the 20 or so steel swords in the sky halted in unison. In the next moment, all of them turned around and shot towards the place where the 3 of them were hiding. Be careful. They're coming. F***CK them up. One of Garcia's great warriors stood up, and his aura surged. Countless thick and black hair grew out from the surface of his body, instantly turning him into a monster that looked like a King Kong. He opened his mouth and bellowed. A violent airflow swept out like a shock wave, directly colliding with the more than 20 flying swords that flew over. Bang, 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 bang. Explosive sounds rang out continuously, and over half of the flying swords were instantly shattered. The Vajra King Kong's sudden and violent breath could actually shatter a long sword made of steel. What kind of ferocious power was this? However, after this attack, the King Kong's face suddenly looked weak. Looking at the remaining flying swords that were flying toward him, he could not even dodge them. It was also at this moment that another black ghost dashed out. He raised his hands up high, and countless amounts of khaki-colored aura gathered on his arms, forming 2 shields that were a combination of geomagnetic forces. The remaining flying swords collided with the magnetic field, but it was as if they had fallen into a quagmire. They were sucked in by the magnetic field. Not only were they unable to penetrate the magnetic field, they even trembled and were unable to fly out. However, even though all the flying swords had been blocked, the 3 of them still did not show any signs of relaxation on their faces, because they knew that the most dangerous attack had yet to come. As the most elite members of Garcia's expedition team, the Vulcan team and the Divine Vanguard team had not died under those flying swords during the few days of pursuit. The flying swords were merely a cover and support for the other party's attacks. From the beginning to the end, what was truly amazing was that elusive sword attack. As expected, at the instant when all the flying swords were blocked, a black shadow suddenly appeared behind the Vajra King Kong. Silver Sword Light was like silver lightning, instantly sending out a torrential rain of sword cheese, piercing toward the Vajra King Kong's back. Puffed. Under the slashes of countless streams of sword cheese, the Vajra King Kong's back was sliced open like a cake. In an instant, over 100 wounds appeared, and blood spurted out. However, just then, green flames spread out from the Vajra King Kong's body. Fang Xingjian's gaze flickered slightly, and he wanted to retreat rapidly. However, it was already too late. It was because this attack that Fang Xingjian had attacked the Vajra King Kong's back. If he wanted to reduce his speed and then accelerate in the opposite direction, he would need at least an instant. However, he was too close to the other party, and the speed of the explosion was too fast. At the instant he completed the reverse acceleration, the green flames had already spurted all over him. He let out a stifled snort and instantly darted into the forest. He kept on rolling and dashing to extinguish the fire. Ha ha! The Vajra King Kong fell to the ground and started laughing maniacally. As he laughed, he kept on spitting out bloody foams from his mouth. Sinkoda's devil, you're dead meat. My brothers will avenge me. Garcia's great warrior, who was controlling the magnetism, walked over. He looked at the Vajra King Kong who had fallen to the ground, looking at the charred and churning wounds all over his body, as well as his body, which was being incessantly burned by the green flames. A sorrowful expression appeared in his eyes. He thought of how they had crossed the seas to come to the Empire. They had been fighting here, fighting their way out for themselves, fighting their way out for a future for Garcia. When the order to retreat had come, they had thought that they would be able to bring a tremendous amount of wealth back with them. However, they had not expected that their companions would end up here one after another. He gritted his teeth and said, Sinkoda's devil, you've killed so many of our companions. I'll let you die a slow death in hell. I'll let you experience pain that you've never experienced in your entire life. The third great warrior who had been hiding also walked out. His eyes were burning with green flames as he looked at the Vajra King Kong and said, Rest in peace. We'll avenge you. At the next moment, he had already pierced the Vajra King Kong's heart with the long spear in his hand. The Vajra King Kong revealed a look of relief. His body twitched a few times before he died completely. From the very beginning, the argument had been an act. In order to kill Fong Xingjian, they had actually come up with a battle plan to let one of them perish together with the Vajra King Kong. They had gotten the great warrior who controlled the green flames to channel more than half of his powers into the Vajra King Kong's body, ready to self-destruct at any moment. Behind the forest, Fong Xingjian looked at the flames which were still burning incessantly on his chest and right arm. He frowned. I was too careless. The great warrior who controlled the green flames and the magnetism had already caught up to him. Sinkoda's coward. Do you only know how to launch sneak attacks? You won't be able to escape after being hit by my venomous flames. There's no water source within over 100 li from here. You're dead meat. Come out. I'll let you witness our Garcia's martial techniques. Previously, Fong Xingjian had been following them day and night, relying on his speed to carry out assassinations. Each time he killed a person, he would hide far away, waiting for the others to relax before launching another assassination. He had not given the two teams a chance to have a head-on battle. It was only now that they had finally managed to injure Fong Xingjian once by performing such a vicious plan of suicide attacks. However, after the two of them finished speaking, Fong Xingjian walked out slowly. Looking at their surprised expressions, he said coldly, Martial techniques? A bunch of wild beasts who eat raw meat and drink blood are worthy of talking about martial techniques? Looking at the enraged expressions of the two great warriors, Fong Xingjian activated Boundaries Negation. With one step, he had already reached one time that of supersonic speed. With his second step, he had already reached 2 times that of supersonic speed. With his third step, he had already appeared behind the two great warriors. Fresh blood swords filled the air, and the two of them had already turned into minced meat. A rain of blood fell onto Fong Xingjian's body, and Fong Xingjian used this rain of blood to extinguish the green flames on his body. After the flames were extinguished, the muscles on Fong Xingjian's body started to wriggle under the circulation of his force. At the next moment, various extravasated blood and poisonous blood spurted out from his wounds like sharp arrows. The wounds then wriggled and compressed together, sealing up the wounds. The 3 specialties, internal healing, internal training, and elementary berserkness, took effect at the same time, healing his injuries. Chapter 139. Looking at the injuries all over his body, Fong Xingjian shook his head and sighed to himself. I had wanted to conserve my potential points and not use boundaries negation to assassinate them one by one. Who would have thought that I would be injured instead? As expected, all first transition experts are not to be underestimated. During this period of time, he had been pursuing the Mukia and had encountered a few battles along the way. Sometimes he would also encounter other night teams, but he basically ignored them and focused on killing the Garcia people. Now, although the experience he received had decreased due to the increase in his level, he had already reached level 14 at 87.9%. This had greatly surpassed the speed at which he had initially planned to level up by hunting ferocious beasts. As expected, killing knights of the same level was the fastest way to level up. It was a pity that such an opportunity was not usually available. Therefore, his agility had reached 134 plus 5 points, allowing his usual speed to far surpass those first transition knights. However, although his speed was extremely fast compared to his 139 points in agility, Fang Xingjian's other attributes were only around 50 to 60 points. This greatly restricted the speed he could unleash. If he did not use boundaries negation, he would not be able to fully unleash his 139 points in agility. The agility attribute represented the ability to burst out and contract one's muscles. Just this attribute alone was very high. But if one's strength, reaction, and flexibility attributes were not sufficient, they would not be able to withstand the wind pressure, transmit the strength to the muscles, and withstand the various pressures under high speed. Without sufficient reaction time, they would not be able to fully unleash their agility attribute. Therefore, although Fang Xingjian's daily speed had increased, it was only by activating boundaries negation, using the ether particles in the world to form an accelerating force field and transmit reaction information that he could break through the limitations of his other attributes. Only then would he be able to perfectly unleash his agility attribute and reach an unbelievable speed. However, boundaries negation would deplete potential points. With 1,000 potential points per second, Fang Xingjian rarely used it. Right now, he could surpass the speed of sound just by performing the Supreme Mistwind Sword. If he continued to perform the Supreme Mistwind Sword to increase his speed, his limit could even reach 1.5 times that of sound. After all, the essence of the Supreme Mistwind Sword was to use sword arts to control the flow of the atmosphere. As his speed increased and the atmosphere pressure increased, the effects of the Supreme Mistwind Sword's acceleration would also decrease. Even so, Fang Xingjian was able to handle Garcia's great warriors at 1.5 times that of supersonic speed. As the saying went, if one failed to hit, one would escape 1,000 miles away. Unfortunately, he did not expect the other party to be so courageous. When he killed those 7 warriors, the other party was already unafraid of death. He could even unleash all sorts of flames, curses, and shockwaves before he died. Now, he was even willing to sacrifice himself to heavily injure him. Although he had immediately unleashed boundaries negation at 3 times the speed of sound and killed his opponent in an instant, the injuries on his body could not be healed. In particular, the poison in the flames invaded Fang Xingjian's blood, causing him to feel weak. Fang Xingjian immediately took out the antidote he won from Yellow Spring Valley and drank it. Poison, burns, and the curse from before. When he had killed one of Garcia's great warriors earlier, something similar to radiation contamination had been unleashed at the instant of his death. This was called a curse by the people of Garcia. This caused Fang Xingjian's stamina to be on the decline and his body to become weaker. However, it was not fatal yet. Although these Garcia's great warriors are far from the empires in terms of their control over the human body and their martial arts legacies, that valiant aura and all sorts of strange, extraordinary powers are indeed troublesome. Even I would fall for it if I wasn't careful. I wonder how many ordinary knights would be injured or killed this time around. With his powerful martial arts realm and sword techniques, Fang Xingjian continued to observe the injuries in his body, observing the condition of his blood vessels, organs, and nerves. He continued to use his microscopic powers to slowly close up his wounds, compress his bones to heal, circulate his vital energy and blood, and protect his organs. Even with the physique of an elementary berserker, I'll still need at least 6 hours for my injuries to heal and not affect my battle prowess. Fang Xingjian frowned, looking at the long sword in his hand, which was full of cracks. My swords are gone too. I'll have to think of a way to replenish them. Thinking of this, Fang Xingjian continued to treat his injuries for another half an hour before he stood up. What he did next was naturally to bury the 3 black men's corpses, waiting for the war to end before retrieving them. They could all be used as materials for an inferior remains divine weapon. Then, with a move of his feet, he leaped out a distance of over 20 meters, dashing towards the forest like a cheetah running at full speed. Although he had been burned, poisoned, and cursed, his running speed was still not much different from that of some ordinary knights. Just as Fang Xingjian was rushing on his way, outside the Kremlin Gulf, a huge steel ship of over 150 meters in length was floating on the surface of the sea. Countless Garcia laborers were building fortresses and fortifications along the coastline. Occasionally, they would glance at the huge steel ship on the surface of the sea, their faces filled with respect. In the command center of the huge ship, an Asian man with a buzz cut and dressed in a black battlesuit was looking at the electronic screen in front of him, bored out of his mind. This electronic screen was very simple and crude, with all sorts of wires and transistors exposed outside. It could only display some blurry black and white images. From the images, it seemed as if they had been captured through someone's line of sight. The Asian man looked at the killing scenes on the screen and let out a cold laugh, saying, "These black devils are really useless. After so many days of effort, they've only managed to capture over 10 knights. How am I supposed to report back?" "All right, Feng Wei. After all, they don't have any powerful legacies. It's already not bad for them to have achieved such results. Capturing knights, testing the surveillance system, and weakening the empire. We've already achieved the 3 objectives," said a young lady wearing a white singlet and blue denim shorts beside him. The young lady's exposed back and legs were covered with large patches of unknown patterns that were twisting like tadpoles, emitting a faint glow. Looking at the images on the screen, she said calmly, "Over 10 knights are enough for us to bring back and continue researching the Empire's martial arts legacies. Although Earthlings can't learn their martial arts, they're still very valuable. I heard that the Academy of Science has already achieved some results. In another 1 or 2 years, they should be able to set up anti-ether force fields throughout the entire demonic city. By then, be it demonic city or miracle world, they won't be a threat." Saying that, she raised her palm and looked at the magic prints that were emitting a faint glow on her arm. She revealed an intoxicated expression. "It's just as the Mage King said. The magic prints contain the powers of the evil gods from another world. I feel that ever since I came to Miracle World, my powers have been growing continuously with the infusion of evil energy. This is the true prowess of the magic prints. I'm only at level 20 now, but my abilities have increased to the point where I'm comparable to a level 20 conferred knight who has just completed his job transition. In fact, I might even surpass them." Feng Wei, who was at the side, looked at the lady beside him, and a hint of wariness flashed in his eyes. Ever since this young lady, who was the #1 genius of the Branch family, entered Miracle World, her aura had become increasingly terrifying. It was as if there was an unknown monster being born in her body, and she was constantly becoming stronger. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.